The first rays of sunlight bled across the valley like a wounded sky. Crimson and gold streaked the heavens, as if the gods themselves had wept through the night and bled their sorrow into the dawn. Mist curled low over the earth, thick as smoke, cloaking the land in a shroud of uncertainty. It clung to boots and hooves, to blade and breath, the kind of fog that swallowed both memory and future. Lucian rode at the front of the column, his silver armor dulled from battle, the once proud sigil of the kingdom marred by ash and dried blood. Each dent was a memory, each scar on the steel a whisper of comrades lost. The holy sword, Radiance, rested at his side, its hilt worn smooth from his grip. Once, it had shone like the sun itself, a beacon of faith. Now, it flickered with reluctant fire, like a dying star in the hands of a man slipping into shadow. The soldiers behind him rode in grim silence, weary, wounded, but still with him. Not for glory, not even for duty, for him, for Lucian, the hero. And yet, even heroes break. A soft wind stirred the mist, trees rustled like restless spirits, and crows circled overhead as silent witnesses to what was to come. Lucian's hand tightened around the reins as he whispered, "Selene will return." He did not speak to the gods. They had stopped listening. He spoke to memory, to guilt, to a ghost that still wore her name. He remembered her laughter, the way she once touched his shoulder to calm the storms within him. The nights they had lain together beneath constellations, whispering of peace, of love, of a future neither of them truly believed in. And yet a broken bar. He had believed in her. So why had she not believed in him? As the fog thinned, a fortress emerged in the distant circle's citadel. Black stone rising like a monolith against the bleeding sky. Silent, watching, daring. No banners flew. No patrols roamed the ramparts. No warning horns. Just that haunting, perfect silence. Lucian felt his stomach twist. He had faced demons, monsters, armies of the damned, but never this. These a broken bar stillness. Form ranks, he shouted, his voice slicing through the morning haze like steel. Radiance lifted high, catching the first glint of light. Armor clattered, shields locked. Rows upon rows of tired, battered men fell into formation. The sound echoed like a prayer over a tomb. The gates opened, not with thunder, not with fury, but with a soft groan. As if the fortress exhaled, a single figure emerged. Lucian's heart stopped. The world tilted. Selene. Her cloak rippled in the morning brazier, black and crimson, the colors of the enemy. Upon her chest, Kael's sigil shimmered like a brand. Her hair was bound tightly, her face expressionless. Not chained, not cowed, free. But not his. Selene, a broken bar. His voice cracked as he stepped forward, radiance trembling in his hand. She halted. Her gaze found his not with pain or apology, but with silence. Cold, steady, detached. "What has he done to you?" Lucian asked, his voice barely a whisper. The world round them blurred. She tilted her head, studying him as if he were a stranger from a forgotten dream. "He freed me." "You loved me," Lucian said, desperation curling around his words like frost. "You swore a broken bar." "I did." Her voice was soft, almost kind, but devoid of warmth. "And then I saw what love truly was." She raised her hand. The battlements screamed with life. 1,000 arrows took flight. The sky darkened with steel. Lucian didn't move, couldn't. From above, Kael watched, cloaked in black, his silhouette like a sovereign shadow. Eyes gleaming with something far colder than hatred. Triumph. "Do you see it now?" Kael murmured, his voice only for Selene. "He doesn't fall because you betrayed him, a broken bar. He falls because you chose me." Selene didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was the answer. Kael smiled, slow and cruel. Then he raised his hand. The gates belched forth his army, a black armored, disciplined, monstrous. An ocean of shadows, trained in silence, born in cruelty, and Lucian's line broke. The screams came in waves. Steel clashed, blood painted the earth. Lucian roared, "Hold the line!" For the kingdom. But his own voice betrayed him, weak, unsure. "What kingdom? What cause?" "When the woman who carried your heart turned her back on it." Lucian surged forward, blade flashing. Radiance ignited in a storm of holy fire. He carved through Kael's soldiers like a tempest. For every man who fell, He felled 3 more. The sword sang. But each strike carried more than fury. Each was a question. Each cut a plea. Where is she? Why? He turned and there she was. Selene, standing between him and Kael's inner sanctum. Her sword drawn. Her face unreadable. His breath caught. He staggered to a halt. Move, he said. She didn't. In her eyes, a war raged. Doubt, pain, memories she had tried to bury. Lucien dropped his sword. Please, he said, not as a general, not as a hero, as a man, as the man who once whispered her name in the dark. Her hand trembled. He stepped closer. But Kael's voice cut through the battle like a whip. Selene. She froze. And Lucien knew he had lost her. Not to chains, not to death, but to Kael. He lunged for his blade. Too slow. Steel flashed. She moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. The dagger slipped beneath his armor, between his ribs, into the space where love once lived. Lucien gasped, breath catching, eyes wide. Pain blooming like fire in his lungs. Were broken bar he choked, blood trailing from his lips. You are my heart. She looked down at him. Not with hatred, not with triumph, with regret. I was. And she turned. Lucien fell to his knees. The battlefield blurred. Footsteps approached. Kael crouched beside him, shadows dancing around his form. You were never a hero, he whispered. You were a placeholder, a myth waiting to be corrected. Lucien tried to speak, to curse, to plead, but Kael's laughter drowned it all. Dark, triumphant, inevitable. Lucien collapsed, radiance slipping from his fingers. The divine fire extinguished. The light within fading like the sun behind storm clouds. The screams of his men faded. The mist swallowed the field again. And somewhere, far away, a broken bar, the kingdom wept. Lucien lay broken amidst the smoldering ruins of his final stand. His silver armor, once a beacon of hope and legend, was now blackened, shattered, and soaked in blood. It reflected nothing of the man he once was, only the truth of what he had become. Not a savior, not a legend, a memory. Around him, the battlefield was silent, save for the faint crackling of fire and the occasional moan of the dying. Smoke drifted across the plain like the breath of some slumbering beast, thick with ash and the stench of death. What had once been a charge of hope and glory had turned into a graveyard. Kael stood over the body, his black cloak billowing gently in the wind, unbothered by the blood or the ruin around him. His gaze lingered on Lucien's still form, not with hatred or triumph, but quiet curiosity, like a scholar examining a broken artifact. He had expected more. Expected a final roar, a flash of defiance. But there had been none. Lucien had not died with a scream. He had died with a whisper. A name. Selene. Behind Kael, Selene stood stiff, her hand still trembling from the final thrust. The dagger's hilt had dug into her palm, and even now, long after the blade had withdrawn, her fingers refused to relax. Her mind echoed with the sound of his voice, pleading not for mercy, but for truth. You are my heart, she had replied without malice, without cruelty. I was. Kael turned to her, eyes unreadable. She met his gaze but found no comfort in it. Only a reflection of her own fractured self. Burn the dead, he said, voice low but absolute. Let the kingdom feel the weight of their loss. His soldiers moved without hesitation. They dragged bodies into heaps. Lit pyres. And when the fires rose, they consumed more than corpses. They devoured history. Lucien's banner, torn and scorched, was tossed atop the flame. Radiance, the holy blade once feared by demons and adored by the faithful, shattered in half, was discarded at Kael's feet. He stared at it for a moment, not with awe, but consideration. Then he turned away. There was no need for relics in his empire. The roar of victory echoed across the valley. Black-armored soldiers raised their weapons high, saluting a war won and a future secured. Kael stood among them, unmoved, a god among men, his enemies vanquished. His throne assured. He had destroyed a myth, and from its ashes, he would forge his dominion. But Selene did not cheer. The fire warmed her skin but not her heart. She watched as Lucien's body turned to smoke, and with it, the part of her that once believed in fairy tales. The news spread like wildfire. Lucien the Radiant had fallen. The knight of prophecy, the slayer of demons, the kingdom's last hope, gone. Nobles who had once toasted to his name now trembled in their halls. Some scrambled to align with Kael, offering land, gold, and even their daughters in marriage. Others fled into exile, hoping to escape the shadow looming over the realm. Kael did not ride to the capital with armies or demands. He walked. When he arrived at the gates, alone, unarmed, the city opened them without resistance. The guards laid down their spears. The people fell to their knees, and the throne near the white throne, adorned with ivory carvings of kings long dead, awaited for him. He took it without ceremony, not as a conqueror but as inevitability. The empire did not fall in fire. It bowed. He ruled from the moment he sat. No coronation, no oaths, no illusions, just silence, deep and crushing, like the calm after a great storm. The court watched him with dread, whispering titles that had no place in scripture. The Shadow King, the Godless Flame, the End of Light. But Kael smiled at none of them. He sat alone on his throne, gazing out across the marble expanse of the Imperial Hall. Selene stood beside him. The dagger she had used now hung at her waist, untouched since that day. Her armor was polished, her posture perfect, but her eyes told another story. She had given him victory. But what had she taken from herself? That night, the palace was quiet, too quiet. Selene sat alone in her chambers. The walls were lined with tapestries of golden lions and white roses, relics of a kingdom that no longer existed. She ignored them. Her gaze was fixed on her hands, clean, soft, unmarked. And yet they trembled. She still felt it. The moment the blade entered his flesh, the warmth of his blood on her fingers. The way he had looked at her, not with anger, but with understanding. He had known. He had accepted it, and that was what haunted her most. The dagger lay beside her on a table, polished, ornamental, useless. But she could not bear to put it away. A knock echoed. She didn't answer. The door opened regardless. Kael stepped inside, his presence like gravity. He said nothing at first, merely watched her. "Do you regret it?" he asked at last. She didn't answer immediately. Her throat tightened. Her heart felt like glass in a storm. "I don't know." He stepped closer, the light from the torches dancing in his eyes. "Regret is for those who acted without purpose." She looked up. "Then why do I feel hollow?" Kael crouched in front of her, reaching out to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was soft. Too soft. "You don't feel hollow, Selene. You feel reborn. You let go of an illusion, and now you are something more." She swallowed. Her eyes glistened. "I hear him." In the silence. "In my sleep." Kael's hand touched her cheek. "And in time, that voice will fade, and when it does, you'll see what you've become." She didn't pull away. But she didn't lean into his touch either. He stood, turning to leave. "Sleep, Selene. Tomorrow, we reshape the world." Weeks passed. Kael ruled like a phantom in daylight. The court danced to his tune, though none could predict its rhythm. Justice was swift, brutal. Mercy was rare. And yet, peace settled over the realm like a funeral shroud. Temples once devoted to light now stood empty. The old faith crumbled. But new whispers began to surface. In the east, where the mist clung to the mountains and the rivers ran silver with moonlight, travelers spoke of a warrior, clad in broken silver, carrying a shattered blade, bearing a name that refused to die. Lucian, a revenant, they called him. A ghost. Kael dismissed it at first. He had watched Lucian burn, felt the heat on his skin, heard the bones snap in the flames. But the stories grew. Villages reporting strange sightings. Bandits slaughtered with radiant fire. Demons slain in the night by a figure who never spoke. Kael stood at the balcony of his palace one evening, staring eastward. The wind tugged at his cloak. Behind him, the empire lay silent, obedient. And yet, he felt it, a tremor in the foundation. Not fear, but something rarer, an unknown, a threat unmeasured, a reckoning on the horizon. The white throne, near once the seat of sacred power and divine right, now bowed beneath Kael's silent command. The banners that had long flown high in the name of kings were replaced with his crest, a serpent devouring a crown, its coils wrapped around a bleeding rose, a symbol that promised both beauty and ruin. The nobles had bent their knees, some with trembling loyalty, others with grudging submission. Merchants continued their trade in whispers. Priests clung to their altars but refused to name their gods. The people did not resist, but neither did they rejoice. The city lived, but only barely, not from love of Kael, from fear. And yet, even that fear was beginning to shift, replaced not by courage, but by something older, colder, something nameless that moved through the streets like a chill wind before dawn, something that made even Kael's loyal inquisitors hesitate before entering alleys too dark, or questioning the silence of an empty barracks. It started as a murmur among patrols near the outer districts. A lone figure atop the shattered ruins of a watchtower, standing like a sentinel carved of moonlight and sorrow. He wore silver-polished plate dulled only by time and ash. Lucien's armor, the same armor that had once caught the sunlight and scattered it like a promise across the battlefield. Impossible. And yet, soldiers had fled in terror, dropping weapons and forgetting oaths. Not because the figure had attacked, because he hadn't. Because he had only watched. Because they had seen death in his silence. Because they believed. And belief, Kael knew, was the first seed of rebellion. Selene had not slept, not truly. She had drifted in and out of dreams, none of them peaceful, none of them honest. She lay beneath silk sheets in a room meant for queens, yet all it felt like was a tomb for the woman she had once been. She stared at the carved ceiling above, tracing its ancient patterns with haunted eyes. Her mind kept returning to the battlefield, the smoke, the screams, and the way Lucien had looked at her before the dagger pierced his heart. There had been no anger, no betrayal, only sadness, only the question he never spoke. Why? She buried her face in her hands, trying to suffocate the memory. The silence of the room wrapped around her like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. And then a chill, the kind that prickled the skin before a storm. Her eyes opened wide. The balcony doors closed earlier were now slightly ajar. Curtains swayed, caught in the breath of a wind too cold for spring. Selene rose slowly, barefoot on marble, the sound of her steps lost to the hush of night. Her heart stuttered. There on the balcony he stood, Lucien, or something that wore his shape, motionless, regal, wreathed in moonlight. The silver armor, dulled and dented, still carried dignity. His cape fluttered like the ghost of a kingdom once proud. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had killed him. She had buried him. She had watched his body burn in the fire Kael lit. And yet, here he was. Lucien didn't speak, didn't raise a weapon, didn't move. He simply looked at her. Not with rage, not even with sorrow, but with knowing, with understanding. And then he raised a hand. A single gesture, not a threat, not a plea, a farewell. Then, gone. The wind stopped. The cold vanished. Selene stood alone again, trembling. A trick of the mind, a dream conjured by guilt, or something more? She looked to the night sky, searching for answers that would not come. Lucien was dead. So why did it feel like she had just seen the truth? The next morning, the throne room was subdued, though no one dared speak it aloud. Kael sat atop the obsidian seat carved from the ruins of a collapsed cathedral, his figure draped in shadow and silence. Light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting distorted images of long-forgotten saints at his feet. He was their god now. And yet, his silence was not divine. It was brooding. Whispers from the outer provinces had reached him too consistent to be dismissed. Lucien was back. Kael's hand tightened on the serpent-headed armrest, fingers tapping rhythmically. A trick, an illusion. It had to be. Selene stood nearby, eyes distant. He didn't look at her when he spoke. Did you see him? She hesitated. Yes. That single word carried the weight of a funeral bell. He turned his gaze toward her slowly, and Selene's voice was flat. He didn't speak. He just a broken bar watched me. Kael's eyes narrowed. You're certain it was him? Her silence stretched too long. I don't know, she admitted at last. But I felt it. Kael rose from the throne, his cloak billowing behind him. Then someone's playing games. Symbolism. Psychological warfare. I'll crush this ghost the same way I crushed the man. She met his gaze finally, but there was no fire in hers, no conviction, just a broken bar absence. It unnerved him. You're doubting me, Selene. Her silence again. It wasn't rebellion. It was worse. It was detachment. Kael stepped closer, lowering his voice. I gave you life, a future, power, and this is how you repay me? She didn't flinch. You didn't save me. You simply made me choose. He stared at her long. I made you worthy. But even as he spoke the words, they rang hollow. He had slain Lucien, crushed a myth. But ghosts were harder to kill, especially when they lived in the hearts of the people, and the woman beside him. By nightfall, the city had shifted. The streets were quieter, not out of obedience, but anticipation. The air held a static charge, as though lightning waited behind every corner. The nobles no longer whispered about Kael behind closed doors. They planned meetings held in candlelit cellars. Money funneled to the outer districts. Old war banners stitched back together in secret. Because in the east, something stirred. Not mercenaries, not bandits. Soldiers, organized, disciplined. And they followed a man who bore Lucian's colors. Kael stood atop the highest tower of the fortress, his cloak whipping in the wind, the stars watching coldly from above. He looked down upon the capital he had claimed. It was his, but only for now. Power wasn't merely seized, it had to be sustained. And fear, he was learning, could not carry a kingdom forever. The people had believed in Lucian. And now, they believed in something again. A ghost, a myth reborn, a symbol he could not kill with blade or fire. He closed his eyes. Was it possible? Had something, a broken bar, refused to die? He had seen Lucian burn, felt the heat, heard the bones crack beneath flame. But a new question whispered through the wind. What if it wasn't Lucian who had returned the broken bar, but the idea of him? In the eastern reaches, beyond Kael's vision, a camp grew with quiet resolve. Soldiers trained in silence, armor polished by calloused hands, eyes filled with reverence. A man stood at their head, a silent, distant. He bore Lucian's face, but not his voice. He did not speak. He simply led. Some swore he was a revenant. Others called him a vessel of the gods. But they all agreed on one thing: he was hope. And hope, when sharpened into believer, could become a weapon deadlier than any blade. Cladon had shattered kings, silenced prophets, and rewritten the very laws of power. His hands had orchestrated massacres with the precision of a maestro, composing symphonies from screams and silences. His enemies didn't die merely, they vanished from history, erased by an intellect that knew no mercy, by a will that bent fate to its knees. He had carved an empire not from the soil of legacy, but from blood and brilliancy, stacking corpses into a throne so black, even the gods dared not gaze upon it. And yet now, there were whispers of a ghost. He sat atop his obsidian seat in the heart of the iron citadel, unmoving, a monolith carved from shadow, the room around him suffused with an eerie tension. Even the torch flames burned more quietly when Cladon was displeased. The High Council chamber was empty save for one. General Voyna, veteran of 40 campaigns, breaker of sieges, loyal to a falter, stood at rigid attention, though sweat beaded at his brow. His armor was polished, but the weight he carried now was not forged of steel. Kael's gaze, sharp as a dagger and twice as cold, bore into him. How many have defected? Clasked, voice soft. But soft was dangerous with Kael. Voren hesitated. A flicker of silence. That was already too long. Several battalions, my lord, he said finally. Mostly along the western marches. Outposts have reported desertions. Entire units gone. They speak of Lucian. They say he walks again, untouched by death. Kael tapped the armrest, once, twice, then stopped. The sound echoed like a death sentence. And what do you believe? He asked, eyes not leaving Voren's. I believe, the general said slowly, the dead should stay dead. Kael's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained unchanged. And yet, they don't. He rose, each motion smooth, deliberate, calculated. He paced toward the window that overlooked the heart of the capital, once his prize, now something he watched for signs of rot. His reflection in the glass did not waver, but the world behind it did. He saw flickers in the alleyways, murmurs of hope returning where he had spent years stamping it out. Not because he had grown weaker, but because they had begun to hope. And hope, Kael knew, was the most insidious poison of all. Lucian had died, screaming, broken, reduced to ash and regret beneath Kael's boot. This was not Lucian. It couldn't be. But someone cleverer had taken his ghost and wrapped it in myth. And now, the people bowed not to reality, but to the memory of a man Kael had already unmade. A lie wrapped in the skin of truth. He loathed that. Behind him, Celine entered silently. The hall did not echo her steps. A shadow of elegance, dressed in silver-threaded black, her eyes were half-lidded, unreadably safe to Kael, who knew how to see through masks because he had taught so many how to wear them. She studied him quietly. From a distance, he looked as he always had her, composed, untouchable, sovereign. But something had shifted. A flicker beneath the surface. Doubt. And that terrified her more than any ghost. Selene had chosen Kael not for love. Love was a foolish thing, but for certainty, for the cold power he wielded like a scalpel. He was the storm one clung to when the world fell apart. But last night, on her balcony, a broken bar. The fog had not moved as it should. The stars above had blinked out for a single breath. And that silver figure, a broken bar, motionless, a broken bar watching a broken bar, had appeared and vanished as if reality itself had buckled. Not Lucian. Lucian had bled beneath Kael's heel. But this thing carried his legend like a cloak. And legends did not obey rules. She did not speak. Not yet. Kael's thoughts were still spinning like knives. Far beyond the capital, in the shadowed remains of a razed village, a figure rode beneath a moonless sky. Silver armor, scuffed and dented. A crest shattered beyond recognition. His helm remained down, face unseen. No banners flew behind him. No cries of rally or command. And yet a broken bar. They followed. Peasants, orphans, broken soldiers. Knights once thought loyal to Kael. He never asked, never beckoned. But they came. The blade he carried had no name, but it had been seen in dreams, in stories told at night by rebel tongues and hopeful mothers. He dismounted, boots sinking into the mud of an old battleground. Before him, a child no older than Taina fell to their knees. "My lord," the child said, voice barely a whisper. "We knew you would return." The knight said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence was a sermon. Behind him, 100 more knelt, and still, they rose behind him like a tide. Back in the citadel, Kael stood at the war table, his altar. Dozens of maps stretched before him, each corner pinned with obsidian weights. Armies, supply routes, rebel cells. He had shaped the board himself, and now someone else was moving pieces. A ghost, a myth, a gambit. "Send no scouts," Kael said, eyes still scanning the maps. "No patrols, no counter-propaganda." Voren stiffened. "Then a broken bar, what do we do?" Kael turned to him and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile that had broken kingdoms. "If they want a ghost, a broken bar," he murmured, "then I will show them what true nightmares look like." That night, as the city slept under uneasy stars, Kael walked alone into the dungeons. The guards bowed, but he said nothing. He passed cells filled with moaning heretics, traitors, madmen, each one broken by his will. He stopped before a heavy iron door, runes glowing faintly around its frame. Inside a broken bar, a prisoner, bound in chains forged from soul steel, gagged with silent sackcloth, eyes hollow. A seer, one who had once dared to look into the void and speak what she saw. He stepped into the cell. "Speak." The silent sackcloth fell away like mist. The seer shuddered, lips trembling. "A broken bar should not ask a broken bar." Kael knelt before her. "I do not ask." "I saw him," she whispered. "In dreams." "In the in-between." "He is not Lucian. He is worse. He is what Lucian could have been if he had died believing." Kael's expression didn't change. "But legends are not born. They are made," the seer continued, "and someone is shaping this one. With blood, with faith, with stories." She looked up at him, terrified. "And the people broken bar, they will follow it, because it is easier to believe in a ghost than a tyrant." Kael stood and smiled. Let them believe. He would show them what belief cost. Selene found him again later, on the highest balcony of the palace. Wind curled around him like a lava, shadows flickering like they recognized their true master. "You're going to answer them," she said. He didn't turn. "I already have." Her voice was quieter now. "And what will you become, Kael?" "To fight a myth." He looked over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "The one thing myths fear most." 3 nights later, riders returned from the west. Villages were burned to ash, but there were no signs of struggle. Only a single symbol etched into every ruin. A spiral of black fire. Not Kael's mark, but something deeper. The work of something ancient. Voren brought the report to him personally. "Who's doing this?" Kael read the parchment, then looked past it. "Past the palace, past the rebellion, past the myth." He spoke only 3 words. "Someone like me." And far beyond the reaches of empire, on a hill that had once seen the fall of kings, the Silver Knight removed his helm for the first time. The villagers gasped. It was not Lucian. It was no one they recognized. And yet a broken bar. They wept, because whoever this man was, he carried Lucian. His bearing, his grief, his fury, and the fire in his eyes was not mortal. It was the fire of the betrayed. The fire of vengeance long denied. He raised his sword, and the people roared. Cladon had conquered kingdoms with fire, brilliance, and dread. He would do it again. But this time, he wasn't facing an army. He was facing a legend. And to kill a legend, truth wasn't enough. You needed terror. You needed myth. You needed to become something even shadows feared. Because somewhere out there, someone was playing Kael's game. And they had made the fatal mistake of drawing his gaze. And when Cladon was interested, empires didn't just fall. They burned. A storm howled beyond the palace walls, as if the heavens themselves had come to challenge Cladon's reign. Thunder cracked like the roar of a dying god, rattling stained glass windows shaped like imperial emblems now twisted by shadow. Lightning tore across the sky in jagged, merciless flashes, momentarily illuminating the black spires of the capital like the ribs of a sleeping beast. The world outside was chaos. But inside the throne room, there was only silence, an unnatural, oppressive silence that pressed against the skin like unseen hands. Even the flames in the braziers dared not flicker too loudly. The stone walls held their breath, and the great banners that once bore the Empire's crest hung like executioners' veils drenched in black. Kael sat alone on his throne of blackened steel, forged not by artisans but by conquest, hammered from the blades of fallen kings, melted in the fires of betrayal, and cooled in the blood of those who once defied him. It rose like a monument to ambition, unyielding and cruel. His fingers tapped against the armrest, slow at first, then faster, sinking with the rhythm of the storm above ear, as if he were orchestrating the weather itself. This was not a war of swords anymore. This was a war of masks, a war of whispers, of secrets buried beneath gilded lies, of power traded in shadows. And Kael was the one who had taught the world how to lie. A sudden creak broke the silence. The iron doors at the end of the hall groaned open, as if exhaling their final breath. Cold wind poured in, trailing behind it a scent of rain and blood. The torches hissed in protest, but did not die. From the darkness beyond, figures emerged. No golden robes, no jewels, no rings of office or chains of command. Only black cloaks and silver masks. 12 of them, each mask unique, etched in delicate filigree, shaped like beasts, blades, or broken crowns. Faces sculpted into expressions of sorrow, rage, silence, and deceit. These were not nobles, not lords. These were the ones who truly ruled at Kael's side. The 12 his inner circle, assassins, spymasters, poisoners, whisperers, the unseen architects of his empire's dominance. Voren led them, as always. His mask was simpler than the rest, plain silver, unadorned. Yet none mistook that for weakness. He was the blade Kael never had to draw, the silence that preceded every death. "They say Lucian has returned," Voren said without preamble. His voice was deep, composed, but beneath it, a challenge simmered. A test. Kael's gaze remained fixed ahead. "Then the people are drunk on fantasy." "And yet," Voren replied, "they believe." Kael didn't blink. "That," he said softly, "is the problem." A woman stepped forward from the group. Her mask was delicate, etched with the lines of a spider's web, its silver shimmer catching the torchlight like strands of fate. She moved like smoke, graceful and dangerous. "It is not Lucian," she said. Her voice was silk-threaded with venom. "But someone wants the world to think it is." Kael leaned forward on his throne, eyes narrowing. "A ghost, then," he murmured. "A fiction in armor." "Fictions are dangerous," rasped another voice. An older man, his mask shaped like a cracked mirror. Kael's lips curled in a faint smile. "Only if we allow them to breathe." The spider-masked woman bowed low. "We have begun the purge." The others inclined their heads. Silent approval, silent obedience. And outside the palace, Kael's spiders danced. Across the capital, in shadowed alleys and moonlit roofs, His web was already in motion. In the market squares where whispers thrived like weeds. In the taverns where rebellion fermented. In the brothels and gambling dens where broken men bartered faith for distraction. In the temples where forgotten gods still waited for prayers that would never come. One by one, they followed the smoke of lies back to the flame. A name emerged from the dark. A meeting place, etched into the bark of a tree long thought dead, hidden deep in the withered grove beyond the city walls. A wax seal, broken, its sigil one not seen since the first sparks of Lucian's rebellion. An old crest, thought buried with the last of the resistance. Each clue was a thread, and Kael pulled them all into his web. But even the strongest web had tension points, cracks, weaknesses, and one of them was sitting alone in her chambers, the candlelight trembling like her breath. Celine. She sat at the edge of her bed, the flickering flame casting shadows across her pale face and hollow eyes. Her armor lay discarded, and her blade leaned against the wall, untouched. She stared at the candle as if it held judgment. Because she had heard the voice again. Celine. A broken bar. It came like a whisper behind her ear, even though no one stood there. You don't belong to him. She should have spat. She should have laughed. Instead, a broken bar. She had listened. The voice, familiar, aching, drenched in memories of broken oaths and lost time. Lucian. She had seen his eyes in the crowd, just once. A flicker, a glimpse. She told herself it was illusion. But now she wasn't sure. She had chosen Kael, hadn't she? She had sworn herself to him in more ways than one. She had shed blood for his cause, lied for him, killed for him, loved him, in the only way a weapon could love its wielder. And yet a broken bar. Why did her chest ache like betrayal? Why did the voice cling to her bones like frost? Was loyalty so fragile, or had something within her already cracked? Who are you, Celine? The blade, a broken bar, or the ghost? Outside, the storm continued to rage. But Kael was no longer in the throne room. He stood upon the northern battlements of the palace, his cloak snapping in the wind, his silver eyes locked on the horizon. The storm licked at him like a hungry thing, but he did not flinch. Lightning danced across the sky, briefly casting his shadow across the city like that of a titan. Then he saw it, a flicker, a single torchlight in the hills beyond the city walls, faint, but steady, a pattern, a signal coded, known only to a few. Voren stepped beside him, silent as death. The source has been found. Kael did not speak for a moment. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were sharper than any blade. It was never a question of if, only when. His voice sliced through the storm. Prepare my horse. Shall I summon the guard? Kael shook his head. Number. This ghost is mine. He turned, the folds of his cloak swirling like wings of shadow behind him. Tonight, the lie would bleed, and the kingdom would remember. Cladon was not haunted by ghosts. He hunted them. The moon hung like a silver dagger over the imperial capital, its pale light casting long, spectral shadows across the nobler states. From the tallest towers of the inner ring to the forgotten alleys of the slumwood, the city held its breath. Rumors, thick as smoke, curled through streets and corridors like rumors of a man who had defied fate and bent empires to his will. Within the obsidian-clad walls of the Emerald Keep, the once forgotten fortress of Ravenmire, Cladon prepared his next move. He sat at the head of a table carved from black stone and inlaid with runes of ancient dynasties, names long erased from the annals of official history but not from memory. The firelight made the carvings flicker as if the dead themselves whispered from beneath the surface. Before him were the highest lords and ladies of the realm, those who called themselves the Empire's true architects. They had gathered not out of loyalty, but out of fear and curiosity. Each wore masks more metaphorical than physical. Silks hid their ambitions, jewels their treachery. They arrived dressed for theater, not war. But Kael was both playwright and executioner. A servant approached, pouring Draven wine into Kael's chalice. A bold gesture, almost blasphemous. The wine was reserved for the high bloods, those whose bloodlines traced directly to the throne itself. Pouring it here, in this place, was a statement. Kael sipped it slowly, deliberately. To his left sat Marquis Valen, the merchant prince who controlled half the Empire's trade routes. His robes shimmered like minted coins, his fingers heavy with signet rings from every guild house that mattered. He smiled often, but never kindly. To Kael's right, Countess Lizara, the infamous court widow. 3 husbands dead, none mourned. Her beauty was cold fire, her smile a trap. Across the table, Duke Reinhold, a relic of war, his shoulders broad with the weight of forgotten battles. He wore his medals even in peacetime, as if to remind others that he had once been necessary. Tension hung heavy, like mist before a storm. Kael let the silence linger. Power, after all, was measured not just by words, but by how long others waited for them. At last, he spoke, voice smooth as velvet laced with steel. "I assume you've all heard the rumors." Valen chuckled, swirling his wine. "Rumors that you seduced the princess, or that you slit the hero's throat with words instead of a blade?" "Yes, Duke Arden." The court buzzes like a hive struck by a stone. Lizara leaned forward, lips curling. "And yet you sit here, untouched, unburned." "Remarkable." Kael placed his chalice down with a soft thud. "Rumors are the currency of the weak." "Ideal in truths." A murmur ran through the nobles. "Unease, intrigue, fear." Kael continued, his voice unwavering. "I did not inherit this seat. I claimed it." "You may despise that, but deep down, you respect it." Reinhold's jaw tightened. "You mistake fear for respect, boy." Kael's gaze met his, unblinking. "Cold." "Then perhaps you've forgotten the difference." Before the old warhound could respond, the great chamber doors groaned open. A soldier entered, kneeling, armor still wet with rain, face taut with urgency. "My lord." "Urgent word from the capital." Kael gestured. "Speak." "Sir Aldrich the Hero dueled a commoner in the lower districts today. He lost." The words landed like a blade across the table. Nobles stiffened. Eyes widened. "Impossible," Reinhold barked. The soldier bowed lower. Crowds witnessed it. The commoner was untrained but fast. Aldrich fought without strategy, recklessly, some say desperately. Now, the people mock him. They say the gods have turned their backs. Lizara's smile turned sharp. A tarnished hero. How fragile symbols can be. Kael leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Faith built on illusion collapses faster than stone. Reinhold slammed his fist onto the table. "You orchestrated this." "He was the Empire's sword." "Then the Empire deserves a better weapon." The air crackled with fury. But no one dared move. Kael's tone remained cool. "You cling to dead icons. I offer living power, evolution." "The old ways brought war, stagnation, and silence. I bring movement." "You fear me because I don't fit your mold." "And you should." He stood slowly, letting the shadows play across his face. "I offer you all a place in the new order. But I will not offer twice." As his words settled like dust on the chamber, another interruption. A messenger, clad in the imperial violet, bearing a scroll sealed in gold and wax. The symbol, a phoenix rising through thorns. Kael took it without hesitation, broke the seal. "Read." "The Grand Imperial Banquet." An event held once a decade, where alliances were forged, rivals assassinated, and futures rewritten. He rolled the scroll closed, laid it beside his untouched chalice, and turned toward the great doors. Valen, suddenly less certain, called after him. "You're going to the banquet?" Kael paused, silhouette framed in firelight. "I'm not going to attend." He turned his head, voice as calm as ice. "I'm going to conquer." And then he vanished down the corridor, leaving behind nobles who had once ruled the empire by birthright, now forced to reckon with a man who ruled by design. Outside, the wind howled over Avonmire. The storm was no longer coming. It had already begun. The imperial palace of Illyrian rose like a divine spear from the heart of the capital, its golden spires slicing the night sky, its obsidian towers whispering secrets of centuries. Tonight, its grand halls pulsed with life, power, and danger. Torches of white fire lined the road, casting halos on the enchanted stones. This was not a celebration. It was a battlefield dressed in silk and song. And Cladon had come to win. As Kael's carriage pulled into the moonlit courtyard, its onyx wheels rolling over silver-veined marble, nobles turned like sunflowers to flame. They whispered behind fans of dragonbone and starlight-threaded lace. The man who'd risen from obscurity, the one who'd silenced guild masters and bent ministers to heel, now walked among emperors and kings. His cloak of midnight velvet trailed behind him, embroidered with the raven of his new house. He silent, watchful, sharp-eyed. Beside him strode Elendra, robed in storm-grey silk, her expression cold and unreadable. Her loyalty was publicly ambiguous, and intended to keep it that way for now. He stepped into the banquet hall, a marvel of architecture and arcane mastery. The ceiling shimmered with illusionary stars moving in slow constellations above, responding to the hour with divine choreography. 1,000 candles floated mid-air, casting dancing lights over painted archways that depicted the empire's victories and lies. Tables of gilded mahogany held feasts fit for demigods, phoenix roasted stag, void fruits that shimmered within a light, and wines aged in temporal stasis. But Kael didn't come for food. He came for power. At the far end of the hall, Emperor Alden Vetra sat on a throne of black crystal and gold, his expression carved from ice. His crown, a circlet of lunar metal and dragon bone, glimmered with embedded memory so literally it was said it recorded the thoughts of each ruler who wore it. Beside him, Empress Selene, a creature of deadly elegance, whispered to Hover's ear. Her emerald gaze flicked toward Kael, not dismissive, not intrigued, calculating. Her beauty was legend, but her mind was sharper than any blade. And at the hero's seat Aldrich, his jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened around a goblet of untouched wine. His gaze flickered when Kael entered, but Kael didn't return it. The damage was already done. The hero's fall would not be loud. It would be quiet, shameful, inevitable. Then, like silk sliding across a blade, a voice called out, "So, you're the infamous Duke of Ravenmire." Kael turned and for a moment, the hall faded. Standing there in a sea of royals was Queen Isolde of Valand, sovereign of the Northern Isles, clad in sapphire silk that clung like temptation. Her silver hair cascaded in loose waves, her skin pale as moonlight, and her lips tinted with frostberry. But it was her eyes so cold, amused, and predatory that demanded respect. Predator to predator, Kael bowed slightly. "Your Majesty." She approached with a feline grace. "You've been busy deconstructing myths, stirring courts, charming widows and warriors alike. Should I be intrigued or concerned?" Kael met her gaze, unflinching. "That depends, Your Majesty." "Do you fear kings rising from shadows?" A pause. Then a smile. I crave them." Their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them, a promise, or a threat. She leaned in, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "Don't disappoint me, Kael. I so rarely find men worth watching." Then she vanished into the crowd, leaving behind the scent of jasmine and blood. A noble passed Kael with a forced smile and hidden scorn. Another lifted a glass in greeting, but their eyes were too wary, too curious. He was no longer an upstart. He was a contender. The chime of enchanted bells echoed across the hall. Conversation died. A herald stepped forth, his voice like magic cleansed glass. "Duke of Ravenmire, the Emperor summons you." The room froze. Eyes turned. Nobles stilled. Even the minstrels faltered. Kael walked forward, each step deliberate, measured. The floor beneath him a mosaic of historical conquests seemed prophetic. He passed statues of old heroes, of founders, of men who thought they could shape the world. Now they stood frozen, reminders of ambition's price. At the foot of the imperial dais, he bowed. Emperor Alden leaned forward slightly, his voice a low thunder. "You rise swiftly, Ardon." "Unnaturally swiftly." Kael smiled, not out of arrogance, but precision. "I rise as quickly as the world demands, Your Majesty." Alden's gaze bore into him. "And what do you believe the world demands?" "Strength," Kael replied. "And change." A murmur ran through the hall. Selene raised a brow. Aldrich shifted, his eyes never leaving Kael. The Emperor's voice dropped. "Do you believe fate favors you?" Kael straightened. A pause. Then, "I believe fate favors those who make it bend." That struck. A long silence followed. Even the illusions above paused. And then, the Emperor laughed. Not a warm laugh. A sharp, dangerous one. "Good," he said. "Then let us see what happens when fate finally pushes back." The challenge hung between them like a blade. One Kael neither accepted nor declined. He simply met the Emperor's eyes, unblinking. "Let it push," he thought, "and watch how I make it kneel." Behind him, the nobles whispered again, louder now. The game had changed, and the banquet had only just begun. The banquet gleamed in opulency. Wine flowed in a continuous stream, music swelled like the breath of the gods, and laughter filled the grand hall, echoing off polished marble and gilded walls. Nobles adorned in their finest attire glided across the floor like peacocks displaying their plumage, their eyes sharp, their words honeyed with hidden agendas. But beneath the gleaming surface, the real game had already begun. Archon moved through the crowd like a blade sheathed in velvet. His presence was a ripple in a vast sea of masks and whispers. Every glance, every subtle nod, every touch of his fingers against a goblet was a calculated step toward his goal. He wasn't here for entertainment. He wasn't here for the feast. He had come for power. As Kael stepped away from the Emperor's throne, a cold shiver ran down his spine. A presence, the kind that made the hairs on his neck stand at attention. He didn't need to look. He could feel it. A silent observer, watching his every move. It was no mere passing glance. No, this was something deliberate, something deeper. A flicker of silk brushed against his armor so faint it could have been a trick of the air. And then, something warm and smooth slipped into his palm. The motion was so swift, so seamless, that it could have been a ghost. Kael didn't flinch. He didn't stop walking. Without a word, he unfolded the note beneath the protective cover of his cloak. His eyes scanned the words quickly. The shadows watch. Leave if you value your life. The note was simple. Dire, yes, but simple. Kael smiled faintly to himself. A warning? A threat? Or perhaps something more sinister? Whatever it was, it would not make him flinch. He would not run. He would not be cowed. Let the shadows come. He tucked the note into the folds of his cloak, his eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of the message. But the faces around him remained unreadably masks of politeness, of intrigue. The game had already begun, and Kael was always 5 moves ahead. The grand hall shimmered with enchantments. Above him, the ceiling moved like the night sky, stars twinkling, constellations slowly shifting as if to remind the guests of the forces at work beyond mortal comprehension. But Kael wasn't here for the spectacle. He was here for the Empire. It was then that she returned. Queen Isolde of Valand. She glided through the crowd, her sapphire gown sparkling like a trap set in the dark, her silver hair falling in waves that caught the light like strands of moonlight. Her eyes are sharp as broken promises metals, and there was something dangerous in her gaze. Something that promised both delight and destruction. You draw attention well, Duke Kael, she purred as she approached, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper. I find myself or broken bar curious. Kael raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth lifting into the faintest smile. Curiosity is the first step toward an alliance, or a seduction. She tilted her head, her lips curling ever so slightly. Or a betrayal. Kael met her gaze steadily, unflinching. I don't fear any of the 3. She leaned closer, her lips almost brushing his ear. Good. Come with me. There are things better spoken away from eyes that pretend not to see. Kael gave a shallow bow. Lead the way, Your Majesty. They had taken only a few steps when the darkness of the night's intrigue came calling. A whisper of motion. A flash of steel slicing through the air. Kael's instincts screamed, his body reacting before his mind even had the chance to fully process what was happening. He twisted, a fraction of a second too late, but just enough to avoid the dagger aimed at his throat. It whizzed past his cheek, the blade grazing his skin, a thin red line appearing as it sliced the air. Time slowed. With practiced grace, Kael spun, reaching out to grab a silver tray from a passing servant. He smashed it into the assassin's skull, the clang of metal against bone resounding through the hall like a thunderclap. The assassin crumpled to the floor, unconscious or worse. Kael didn't stop. He didn't even look back. A second figure dropped from the ceiling, landing with the precision of a trained predator. Twin daggers gleamed in his hands, poised for another strike. Kael moved faster than thought. In one fluid motion, he drew his dagger, spinning it in his hand as he ducked under the assassin's thrust. He struck low, severing the man's tendons in a single, brutal movement, then pressed his knee into the assassin's back as he brought the blade down in a swift arc. The assassin collapsed with a gurgling gasp, his body twitching for a brief moment before it stilled. But Kael wasn't alone. Isolde was there faster than Kael had expected. She was a blur of motion, her sapphire gown flowing like a liquid shadow. From a hidden sheath in her dress, she unsheathed a blade, a long, slender thing, perfect for close quarters. In a flash, she carved through the assassin's neck, the blade biting deep. The man crumpled without a sound, his blood spilling across the pristine marble floor in a dark, wet stain. Kael's eyes flicked to her in acknowledgement. Efficient. She wiped the blood from her blade with a single, practiced motion, her gaze sharp and calculating. "You're not the only one who plays dangerous games, Claudon." Then, as if on cue, the banquet shattered. Screams echoed from every corner of the room as masked figures emerged from the shadows, some wielding blades, others arcane magic, each one a phantoma, an executioner masked as a noble. The peaceful atmosphere of the banquet hall dissolved into chaos. Blood splattered across the golden tapestries as the guests were ripped from their masks, forced to reveal their true allegiances. The palace became a battleground. Kael moved through the chaos like a predator among prey. An assassin lunged at him from the side, but Kael was already there. He caught the man's wrist mid-strike, twisted it with the sharp snap of bone, and drove his dagger deep between the ribs. The assassin collapsed without a sound, his life extinguished in a moment. Another came from behind another masked figure, blade raised. Kael ducked, sweeping his leg out to trip the man, sending him crashing to the floor. Before the assassin could recover, Kael was on top of him, driving his knee into the man's jaw with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed. Nobles scrambled for cover. Magic flared. The room was alive with violence. Through the swirling chaos, Kael's mind remained clear. He didn't flinch. He didn't waste energy. He dismantled the threat with surgical precision, each strike calculated, each movement honed through years of training and manipulation. And yet, through it all, the Emperor remained on his throne, unmoved. He didn't intervene. He didn't give a command. He was watching. This wasn't an attack. This was a test, a challenge, a purge. Kael could feel it in the air. From the corner of his eye, he saw Aldrich, his old rival, fighting amidst the fray. His movements were chaotic, uncoordinated. He was a hero, yes, but only in name. His strikes were hesitant, his defense sloppy. He was playing at a game that Kael had mastered long ago. Kael was the opposite. He was cold. He was precise. He was the one who would walk away from this battlefield unscathed. By the time the last assassin fell, a throat opened, chest punctured, soul severed. The room fell to silence. The Emperor stood. The hush that followed was absolute. "Interesting," Alden Vetra's voice rang out, cold and calculating, like a king admiring a chess piece. He had just moved into place. He descended the dais slowly, each step deliberate, as though admiring a performance. His hands were clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on Kael as though he were studying the young duke like a specimen under a magnifying glass. "You handled yourself well, Duke Kael," the Emperor said, his voice low, but carrying a weight that seemed to reverberate through the shattered remnants of the banquet. Kael wiped the blood from his blade with a silk cloth offered by a trembling servant, then flashed the Emperor a smile devoid of fear, devoid of respect. "Your Majesty throws fascinating parties," Kael remarked, his voice dripping with casual indifference. The Emperor chuckled darkly, a laugh devoid of humor. "And you pass fascinating tests." He gestured toward the carnage surrounding them. These assassins were real, but so were the eyes watching. A servant approached, holding a velvet box on a black pillow. Kael opened it. Inside was a signet ring, forged from gold and obsidian, its center bearing the imperial crest of power, a raven piercing a serpent. It was symbolic. It was intentional, and it was dangerous. The Emperor's voice rang like a decree through the hall. "Welcome, Claudine, a broken bar to the Empire's true games. You are now one of my chosen," the nobles whispered. Queen Isolde's lips curled into a smile, and Kael. He simply slipped the ring onto his finger. The game had changed, and Claudon had just made his first move. The imperial palace gleamed under a cascade of golden chandeliers, their light glinting off polished marble floors and high-vaulted ceilings. But even the brilliance of the crystal could not dispel the heavy tension in the air. Every breath was shallow, every glance held sharp calculation. 1,000 eyes, 1,000 silent plots, each one a delicate thread in the web that Claudon had woven so expertly. At the heart of it all stood Kael himself, a predator in the midst of a flock of frightened sheep. His crimson and black cloak swept behind him like the shadow of a vulture circling above its prey. He was unhurried, moving with deliberate purpose, each step measured. He was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to his stillness, a promise of something far darker should the world cross him. He did not speak, and he did not need to. His silence held more weight than any proclamation. His mere presence was enough to hush the whispers that flickered in the corners of the hall. It was as if the very air around him bowed, as though the palace itself understood that its fate had already been sealed. The throne was vacant, to a hollow, imposing seat that had once commanded the loyalty of empires, now empty. The emperor's absence loomed larger than any grand speech. His silence had become the loudest declaration. For days, rumors had been circulating like a plague in the city and beyond the palace walls: illness, madness, sorcery. But Kael knew better. He had been the one to sow the seeds of that decay quietly, carefully. A whisper here, a subtle manipulation there. It hadn't been blades or poison that had brought the emperor low, but doubt. The slow, insidious kind that gnawed away at the edges of a man's sanity until nothing was left but the crumbling husk of what had once been. Kael had not only poisoned the emperor's mind, he had made sure no one would ever look to him for strength again. It had been a delicate work of years, but now Kael was ready to claim what rightfully belonged to him. The old lion slumbered, and the court was ripe for plucking. From the shadows at the back of the room, the chancellor spoke, his voice a thin thread of fear and hesitation. "Duke Cladon," he intoned, bowing deeply as he fought to maintain composure, though his voice trembled, "the Imperial Council stands ready at your command." The words rang like a bell, cutting through the thick air. Kael's lips curled into a faint smile, the ghost of something dark and triumphant. "Then let us speak of the Empire's future," he replied smoothly, his voice a velvet command that made even the most ambitious of nobles hold their breath. The grand doors of the hall exploded open. A surge of armored soldiers poured into the room, their silver breastplates gleaming in the torchlight, the sound of their heavy boots like the ominous thrum of a heartbeat. They spread out in perfect formation, creating a wall of iron between Kael and the council. At the front of them, a tall figure stepped forward, a man once loyal, once a friend, now a fool. Lord Castian, the Empire's most decorated general, locked eyes with Kael, his jaw set in grim determination. His hand hovered over the hilt of his sword, but his knuckles were pale, betraying the unease within. "By the order of the Emperor," Castian announced, his voice cracking as though the weight of his words threatened to break him, "Duke Kael is to be arrested for treason." The room erupted into chaos. 1,000 gasps rang through the hall, sharp and sudden as thunderclaps in the distance. The nobles stumbled back, their eyes wide with disbelief. Whispers rose and fell like waves crashing upon a shore, their content unimportant, the fear in their voices undeniable. The Emperor's name was invoked. Treason was the most dangerous accusation of all. Kael did not flinch. "Treason?" he echoed softly, his voice silk over daggers, each syllable deliberate, sharp. "You disappoint me, Castian. I expected more from you. More than parroting a command you don't even believe." The general's hand twitched, but he did not respond. There was a hesitation there, a crack in his once ironclad resolve. Kael's gaze did not waver, his posture unyielding. Castian's soldiers wavered. Some looked toward their commander, doubt flickering in their eyes, and others glanced nervously at Kael, unsure which path would lead to survival. The air in, then, a long silence. From above, a figure descended from the upper balcony, a silent, graceful, a shadow peeled from the night. Queen Lizara. She was a vision, wrapped in midnight silk that shimmered with an otherworldly sheen, her gown trailing like a nebula in motion. Each step she took was deliberate, echoing softly through the grand hall, commanding the attention of every noble present. She descended with the poise of a goddess, the crowd parting before her as if the very air held its breath in reverence. Her violet eyes locked onto Kael's, and in that moment, the world stilled. Every sound vanished. Every whisper died. The tension in the room became palpable, the silence deafening. The queen did not speak immediately. She studied Kael with a look that could have cut stone. Her lips barely parted, and when she spoke, her voice was a velvet blade, cutting through the room like the finest of steel. "The Empire does not need proof," she said softly, her gaze never leaving Kael's. "It needs control." A beat passed before Kael's lips curled into a slow, calculating smile. His eyes gleamed with something dark and unfathomable, something that hinted at far greater ambitions. "And what control do you offer, your majesty?" Kael asked. his voice rich with mockery and intrigue. The kind that clings to a dying monarch, or the kind that reshapes the throne itself? Her lips curved slightly. Was it amusement or approval? No one could say. But Kael could see the flicker of something in her gaze, something dangerous, something calculating. They circled each other with words, each sentence a calculated blow. Her words were sharp, but his were sharper, each one a barbed arrow designed to pierce through her defenses. Castian stood frozen, his soldiers equally paralyzed, caught between two storms that neither could control. Lizara stepped closer, her steps silent but heavy with purpose. She lowered her voice, just enough for Kael to hear, her words like poison wrapped in silk. "You're dangerous, Cladon," she said, her breath a soft whisper against his ear. "Dangerous men either die broken by or become kings." Kael leaned in, his body just inches away from hers, his voice low but steady as he replied. "Then let's see which I become, Lizara." The words hung between them, thick with implication. For a moment, no one in the room breathed. The tension was unbearable, almost tangible, like a blade poised to strike. And then, the sound of the court's collective exhalation broke the silence, a slow, uneasy release of breath. The nobles exchanged glances, each one realizing what had been made clear. The true game of power had begun, not between the emperor and his subjects, but between Kael and Lizara. Castian looked to Lizara, his hands trembling, his mind clearly struggling to understand. The soldiers at his back were no better, caught between their loyalty to the empire and their growing uncertainty in the face of this new force, this shadow that now loomed over them all. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, and Kael saw the glimmer of something more intimate, a silent acknowledgement, an unspoken decision. She was no fool. She knew exactly what Kael was, a spider who had spun a web, each thread tightening around the empire. But what did she intend to do about it? What would she decide? The queen's gaze softened at her just enough to allow the faintest smile to tug at her lips. It was a smile that held both approval and danger. And in that moment, the court knew the truth. The real ruler was not the frail man on the throne, nor the queen who claimed dominion by title alone. It was Cladon, the architect of their fate, the spider whose web had ensnared them all. But Lizara? She was not trying to stop him. She was deciding whether to rule. Beside him, a cold, suffocating silence descended upon the grand hall, wrapping itself around every soul present. It was not the silence of peace, nor of contemplation. It was the silence of expectation, the silence that came before a storm, thick with tension and pregnant with the promise of conflict. The light from the towering chandeliers flickered against polished marble, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch with every breath. At the center of it all, Cladon stood like a dark god among mere mortals, his every movement calculated, his presence commanding the space in a way that no words could. His crimson and black cloak billowed behind him, an embodiment of blood and shadow, his golden eyes gleaming with the fire of a man who had long since stopped fearing anyone or anything. He was the predator, and in this hall, all were prey. To his right stood Queen Lizara von Eldoria, not in armor, but draped in the regal elegance of midnight silk. Her very presence seemed to bend the air, turning the room into something smaller, more intimate, as though they were the only two players on a chessboard of unimaginable stakes. The nobles, frozen in place, dared not speak, their hearts pounding in their chests. There was no sound in the room save for the clinking of a nervous soldier's armor, the soft rustle of silk, and the occasional sharp intake of breath from those who dared to look directly at Kael. The emperor's absence was a palpable thing, hanging in the air like an accusation. His throne sat empty, a silent reminder of his failure, a vacancy that no one had yet dared to fill. Whispers had circulated for days now of illness, madness, sorcery. But Kael knew the truth. The emperor was not dead, not yet, but his power had been chipped away piece by piece, slowly, meticulously, until all that remained was a man on the verge of collapse. And Kael, in his typical fashion, had been the architect of that slow decay. He didn't need poison or steel, he had simply planted doubt, whispers here, insinuations there, promises to those who could be bought, threats for those who could not. He had turned the very people the emperor relied on into liabilities. He had made the emperor weak without lifting a finger in violence. And now, as the court held its breath, The only question that remained was how long the crumbling empire would hold on before it fell into Kael's waiting hands. The soldiers in the room shifted nervously as General Castian, a hulking figure in gleaming armor, stepped forward. His face, once a trusted ally's, was now that of a man who had been cornered by fate. Behind him, his men formed a loose ring, weapons at the ready but their hands shaking ever so slightly, as though they too knew something was about to break. They were not facing an enemy, they were facing the inevitability of change, and they could not decide which side to align themselves with. By the order of the Emperor, Castian announced, his voice tinged with uncertainty, Duke Cladon is hereby arrested for treason. A collective gasp passed through the court, sharp and electric, as if the very air had been laced with a new danger. But Kael stood unmoving, his gaze cold and calculating, as if the words had been nothing more than a mild inconvenience. His lips twitched, but only enough to form the barest hint of a smile. There was no fear, no alarm, just an unsettling calm. Treason? He echoed softly, his voice silk-wrapped around steel. His words were like a knife drawn with care, poised and dangerous. You disappoint me, Castian. I expected more than parroting a command you don't even believe. The general faltered, a slight quiver running through his posture. He knew or had always known that this confrontation was never about loyalty or treason. It was about power, and Kael had long since outmaneuvered everyone in this room. Castian hesitated, his sword arm twitching as though torn between following orders and confronting the reality that Kael had already won. A silence fell once more, one that clung to the room like the weight of an impending storm. Kael took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Castian's, his presence overwhelming. No evidence, Kael continued, his tone smooth as he addressed the soldiers. No witnesses, only fear. Are you here to uphold justice, or to die for a crumbling crown? Castian's soldiers wavered, their resolve cracking, their weapons faltering as they turned their gazes toward their general. Their loyalty, which had once been unwavering, was now tainted with doubt. Doubt not just in Castian's leadership but in the very empire they had sworn to protect. And then, like a shadow uncoiling from the darkness, Queen Lizara appeared. The room seemed to constrict, as if the very air had been drawn in by the magnetism of her presence. She descended from the upper balcony, each step a measured cadence, each movement deliberate and suffused with the unspoken authority that hung around her like a cloak. Her violet eyes, as cold and beautiful as twilight itself, met Kael's across the room, and for a fleeting moment, the entire court seemed to hold its breath. The tension in the room shifted, like the quiet before a battle, and in that silence, Lizara's voice cut through with the precision of a blade. The Empire does not need proof, she declared, her tone both a command and a whisper of ice. It needs control. Kael turned his head, acknowledging her words with a tilt of his chin, his golden eyes gleaming. There was no surprise in him, no shock, just a growing understanding of the game unfolding before him. The Queen was playing her own hand and he had been waiting for this. And what control do you offer, Your Majesty? Kael asked, his voice low, dangerous. The kind that clings to a dying monarch, or the kind that reshapes the throne itself? Lizara's lips quirked in the faintest of smiles, though there was no warmth in it. Both, she replied, her voice honeyed but lethal, if necessary. The words were a challenge, one that rang through the chamber like a death knell. It was clear now. This was not a game for the weak-hearted. The Queen was not here to stop him. She was here to see if he could be the one to take the throne, to see if he was the architect of a new order or merely another self-destructive fool, like the Emperor before him. Kael's lips curled into a smile, the kind that promised both danger and delight. Then perhaps I've already begun, Lizara. Her violet eyes locked with his, and in that moment, something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, but it was there a flicker of recognition, of curiosity. She was no longer merely a queen, a puppet on the strings of power. She was now a player in her own right, moving with calculated grace, testing him to see if he was worthy of the throne she too desired. And then, in a whisper meant only for him, Lizara spoke, her breath cool against his ear. I needed to see if you would flinch, or devour. Kael's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the surge of anticipation that only the truly dangerous feel when their greatest challenge stands before them. I don't flinch, he whispered back, his voice laced with steel. "And I never stop until the game is mine." With a slow, deliberate movement, Lizara stepped back, her presence still suffusing the room like the fading scent of roses and death. Her smile was unreadable, but her eyes, those violet eyes, held something new. Respect, amusement, something darker, perhaps, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface. It was a challenge accepted. "Then let us talk," she said, her voice now as smooth as the surface of a blade. In that moment, the balance of power in the court shifted, irrevocably. The Emperor was silent, lost to the world. General Castian, the soldiers, the nobles, they were all now pawns in a game that had shifted beyond their control. And Kael had taken his first true step toward the throne. But Lizara, she had made her move. And Kael, he had just accepted her opening. The grand halls of the Imperial Palace pulsed with a quiet, uneasy tension. Gold leaf shimmered on the ceiling, and crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted archways, their brilliance casting fractured beams of light onto the polished marble floors below. Yet, despite the opulence, the air felt heavy with something far more ominous than the weight of power. The nobles, usually animated in their courtly games, sat in silence, their whispered words muted behind the elegant fans they used to shield their faces. Eyes constantly darted toward the Emperor, who sat in a throne of gilded obsidian, his posture regal yet undeniably weary. His fingers gently drummed on the armrest, each tap a reminder of the pressure building within his empire. The weight of the throne had long begun to bend him, the once vibrant Emperor now looking as though the crown had grown too heavy for his brow. The Empire, once an unshakable force that stretched across the lands like an iron fist, had begun to falter. The cracks were appearing everywhere, from the rebellious whispers of the people to the ominous silence of a court losing faith. And at the center of it all, standing like a storm in the calm, was Claudan. Sitting in the far corner of the room, leaned back casually in his chair, his golden eyes half-lidded with a quiet amusement as he swirled a glass of crimson wine in his hand. The drink danced in the light, each swirl a deliberate motion, as if he were savoring not just the taste, but the scene unfolding before him. Every eye in the room, every whispered word, every tense breath a broken bar, they were all part of his design. He had planted every seed of discord in this court, carefully and without haste, and now the fruit was ripening. This was no accident. This was all part of the game. As if on cue, the voice of Duke Varlin cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "Your Majesty," Varlin said, his voice strained and anxious, "the western provinces spiral further each day. Bandits raid our caravans, uprisings erupt from starving villages, and merchants refuse the tariffs. The people no longer fear imperial decree. They mock it." The Emperor did not even look at him. His gaze remained fixed forward, as if the words were merely the rustling of leaves against an unshakable tree. "Then Senate General Albrecht," he replied indifferently. Kael's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. He had already anticipated this response. The bandits were his mercenaries, so well paid, loyal to him alone. The uprisings were nothing but carefully crafted sparks of unrest, all nurtured in the shadows. The merchants, who now refused to pay tariffs, were bound by a network of subtle coercion, all strings tied to Kael's fingers. Kael set down his wine glass with a soft, deliberate click. The murmurs of the court paused in their tracks. The nobles, sensing the tension, shifted in their seats. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Kael said smoothly, rising from his seat, his movements elegant and deliberate. "But steel may silence one rebellion while feeding 3 more. This is not a fire we can extinguish with swords." The court turned their attention fully to him, the Emperor arching a brow in curiosity, while Varlin, ever the cynic, scoffed in disbelief. Kael descended from the dais, his voice cool and measured, cutting through the air like a blade through silk. "Rot must be treated at the root. Send a sword, and they resist. Send a diplomatist, someone with vision, and they'll follow." Duke Varlin opened his mouth, likely to protest, but Kael's steely gaze silenced him before the words could escape. The silence stretched for an uncomfortable moment. The Emperor leaned forward in his throne, his expression inscrutable. "You would go yourself, then?" "I would," Kael replied without hesitation. "Not as a general, but as a nobly bearing words, not threats." "Words last longer, Your Majesty." For a long moment, the Emperor was silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on his shoulders. Finally, with a slight nod, he spoke. "So be it. You will act in my name." "See it done." Kael bowed with perfect grace, his smile thin but full of promise. The court broke into murmurs, some in awe, others in suspicion, but no one dared to voice a protest. Kael had already won. The first piece had been moved. As the nobles began to disperse, Kael felt a pair of eyes upon him. He turned, his gaze meeting the empresses from across the room. Selene was standing in her place, her silver hair cascading like a stream of moonlight over her shoulders. Her golden eyes were fixed on him with unwavering intensity, sharp and calculating. Though her throne was lower than the emperor's, it did not diminish the power she exuded. It only seemed to magnify the fire within her. Her presence alone was enough to command the room. Kael's lips quirked upward in the faintest of smiles, a gesture that acknowledged her without submission. She did not look away, her gaze unwavering. The court buzzed around them, yet in that moment, they were alone. She spoke first, her voice low but clear. "There's more to you than ambition. You do not seek power. You mold it." Kael's smile deepened, a calculated expression, a cold, knowing, and sharp as a blade. "And you do not sit beside a throne. You wait to inherit it." The tension between them was palpable, charged with an energy neither was willing to break. The air felt thicker, like the calm before a storm. Selene tilted her head slightly, as if pondering his words. The corner of her lips curled upward in the faintest of smirks. "Soon," she said. The word, a promise that lingered in the air long after she vanished into the shadows. Kael remained standing for a moment longer, his eyes following her retreating form, his heart calm, his mind racing. He could feel the shifting of the board. The queen was entering the game. Days passed, each one carrying its weight with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The wind howled through the ragged banners of the western camps, the scent of dust and sweat hanging thick in the air. Kael arrived at the rebel camp, his clothes traveling worn but immaculate, every step purposeful. He entered the heart of the camp, an unassuming tent where the leader of the uprising, Garrick, awaited him. The rebel leader stood with his arms crossed, his posture defiant. He was a large man, his features hardened by years of struggle, and the anger in his eyes was a smoldering fire. "They sent a noble," Garrick spat, his voice thick with disdain. "To speak for an empire that's already dying?" Kael placed a pouch of gold on the table between them, his movements slow, deliberate. He watched Garrick's eyes flicker toward the gold, then back to him. "They sent me," Kael said softly, his voice carrying an undeniable weight. "Because I see value in survival." Garrick's scowl deepened. "And you think we'll kneel for coin?" Kael's voice was calm, unhurried, but it cut through the tension with the precision of a blade. "I think you're a man who knows the cost of losing, and I am offering you a future you survive." Garrick's gaze flickered to the pouch of gold again, a subtle shift, but one Kael didn't miss. "And if we refuse?" Garrick asked, his voice low and dangerous. Kael's expression didn't change, his golden eyes cold as ice. "Then in a month, I'll be back. And I won't be offering gold, just monsieur if you're lucky." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Garrick reached for the pouch. Another thread, pulled taut and tied. Upon Kael's return, the emperor praised him in public, his words laden with gratitude, his eyes too weary to see the subtle power shift. The western provinces quieted, rebellion quelled without the shedding of blood. The court, in hushed talk, whispered of Kael's deft handling of the crisis. But Kael knew the true reward wasn't in titles or public praise. The real prize was far more valuable. It was the attention. The court's eyes were now fully upon him. As Kael walked through the marble corridors of the palace, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Duke." He turned. There, standing in the shadows of a dimly lit corridor, was Selene. Her presence was like the calm before a storm, an unsettling stillness, yet beneath it, the promise of something dangerous. "There's more to you than ambition," she said again, her eyes piercing into his. "You do not seek power. You mold it." Kael's smile was slow, deliberate. "And you do not sit beside a throne. You wait to inherit it." Her lips curled into a small smile, but it was unreadable. "Soon," she said, her voice holding a note of finality. With that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving Kael alone with his thoughts. The pieces were moving. The game was in full swing. And fate, it seemed, was no longer something to be feared but something to be woven. The night had settled over the imperial palace like a thick, velvet cloak, the moon casting long, pale streaks across the towering domes, their intricate carvings barely visible in the darkness. Shadows pulled in every corner of the marbled corridors, their silent presence a testament to the secrets whispered behind gilded doors. Cladon leaned back in his chair, the rich scent of aged wine filling the air around him as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. His long fingers danced over the parchment, the faint flicker of candlelight reflecting off his calculating gaze. The whispers in the court had grown louder in his absence, but his return had only intensified the tension. Power had shifted subtly, but irrevocably, in his favor. The Emperor's favor, that was. The Emperor's waning grip on his own throne had not gone unnoticed. But Kael knew better than to be swayed by mere appearances. The court's murmurs and the Emperor's praise were mere dust compared to the long, slow game of power Kael was playing. He was in motion, a wheel within a wheel, and every step he took set a new thread of fate in motion. The knock on his door was soft at first, but its intent was undeniable. Kael's gaze flicked to the door, a slight tension in his shoulders as he set the reports aside. It was an interruption, and he did not welcome many. Still, this was no ordinary intrusion. He knew who it was before the door creaked open. "Enter," he called, his voice steady, his mind already shifting focus from the reports to the game at hand. The door opened, and with it, a wave of intoxicating perfume filled the room. The fragrancy of sweet jasmine, with a trace of amber lingered like a whisper of forbidden desire. Kael glanced up, his eyes narrowing slightly at the figure who had entered, as if he had been expecting her arrival, though it was later than he had anticipated. Empress Selene. She stood there, framed by the doorway like a vision in silver and black. Her gown shimmered like the night sky itself, embroidered with delicate dragons that twisted along her waist and down the curve of her hips. The dark fabric clung to her form with effortless elegance, and her silver hair cascaded down her back in waves, each strand reflecting the dim light like molten moonlight. Her golden eyes sharp, calculating, and infinitely knowing met his without hesitation. "A late visit, Your Majesty," Kael said, his voice low but filled with the subtle edge of amusement. "Or perhaps an early move?" A faint smile quirked the corner of her lips as she stepped into the room, the soft swish of her gown the only sound that broke the silence. She moved with the grace of a panther, slow, deliberate, each step calculated. Kael did not rise from his chair, but his gaze followed her every movement with a watchful intensity. "Both," she replied, her voice soft, almost velvet, but with an undeniable edge of authority that cut through the calmness of the room. She crossed the floor toward him, and as she did, the air itself seemed to shift charged with the tension between them, thick with the knowledge that both were predators in this court of sheep. Kael remained seated, unmoving, but fully aware of the weight of her presence. He studied her, his mind working at full capacity, calculating every word, every gesture. "I must commend you," Selene said, her voice carrying an undertone of something more than mere flattery. "Not many return from the provinces with both their pride and their neck intact." Clutched a brow, a half-smile curling on his lips. "I find solutions are more enduring than swords." "And far more dangerous," she replied smoothly, her fingers tracing the edge of his desk, her touch light but leaving an unmistakable trail of intent. Her gaze never wavered from his. Kael's smile deepened, his golden eyes glinting with a sharpness that matched hers. "That's an assessment I agree with." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the silence between them was palpable, the kind of silence that only two people who truly understood each other could share. And in that silence, Kael felt something flicker, a spark of recognition, an acknowledgement of the game they were both playing, the stakes they were both reaching for. Then Selene's voice broke the stillness again. But this time it was softer, more intimate. "Do you know what it means to sit beside a throne, Kael? To smile and nod while your voice is silenced, your power diluted into etiquette and illusion?" Her gaze darkened slightly, a flicker of something that bordered on contempt flashing across her golden eyes. Kael said nothing, but his interest piqued. He watched her carefully, his eyes flicking to her fingers as they brushed lightly over the polished surface of the desk. "I have worn that crown for 10 years, she continued, her voice steady. though beneath the calmness was a palpable tension. "They call me queen, but they've forgotten I am descended from the dragon line. Blood that once commanded nations is now expected to host banquets." Kael's expression didn't change, but his mind whirred, analyzing her words. He had known about her lineage, everyone did. But to hear it spoken so plainly, with such weight behind it, was a different matter entirely. "And you want to change that," Kael said, his voice neutral, though his eyes burned with understanding. "I will change it." Celine's voice hardened, the steel beneath her silk unmistakable. "The Emperor is weakened, surrounded by sycophants and shadows. He cannot protect the throne, he can barely hold it." Her gaze pierced him, as if searching for any sign of resistance. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice low, almost intimate now. "You understand how the game is played. You don't beg for power. You make power beg for you." Kael leaned back in his chair slightly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "And what do you offer, Your Majesty?" Her eyes gleamed with something far sharper than mere interest. "Not loyalty, not love. Alliance. A partnership between two predators tired of wearing masks for sheep." Kael studied her for a moment, calculating the weight of her words. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no fear, no desperation, just the cold, unyielding certainty of someone who had waited too long to claim what was hers. "And what is it you seek?" Kael asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though his tone held the gravity of 1,000 unspoken truths. "Freedom," Celine whispered, her voice raw, as if the word itself was a confession. "Real freedom. From the throne, or behind it, I care little, but I will not kneel to a crumbling legacy." She took a step forward, and Kael watched her every movement with the intensity of a hawk hunting its prey. She placed one hand on his desk, leaning forward slightly, her golden eyes burning with the weight of her words. "You already walk the edge of treason. Align with me, and you will not walk alone." Her words hung in the air, thick with meaning. There was no hiding the truth in her statement. Her offer was a dangerous one, a path that would lead them both into the heart of treason, but the rewards would be immeasurable. She was not asking for his loyalty, nor for his love. She was offering him a partnership, a chance to tear down the old world and rebuild it in their image. Kael met her gaze, unblinking, his mind a storm of possibilities. "You understand the cost of such a move?" "Yes," Celine said, her voice steady, her resolve unshaken. "And I am willing to pay it." Kael studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. She was not like the others. She was not desperate, nor was she driven by some fleeting desire for love or power. She sought only freedom, and in that pursuit, she was willing to risk everything. "A dangerous offer," Kael said, his voice low, his smile slow. "The only kind worth considering," she replied, stepping back and turning toward the door. "I leave the choice to you, but remember, a indecision is a decision all its own." With those final words, she glided out of the room, her gown trailing behind her like a shadow, her scent lingering in the air like a sin not yet committed. Kael remained still for a moment, staring at the empty doorway. The weight of her words settled in his chest, and a slow, dangerous smile curved on his lips. The Empress had moved her piece. Now it was his turn. The Grand Council chamber stood like a colossus of power, of vaulted ceilings adorned with silver inlays, obsidian pillars carved with ancient conquests, and chandeliers that cast shifting shadows like watching eyes. It wasn't merely a hall, it was a battlefield of kings and killers, draped in velvet. Every corner whispered secrets, every breath was heavy with the weight of decisions that could shatter empires. Around the vast obsidian table sat the empire's strongest, dukes cloaked in lineage, generals blooded in war, priests wreathed in prophecy, and court mages whose words could shift the wind. They all waited in heavy silence, each of them a player in a game they all believed they controlled. But one man in the room had already set the board to his advantage, and it was not the Emperor. At the head of the table sat Emperor Aldrich Vanthos, his presence as sharp as the blade resting at his side. Though age lined his face, his golden eyes still gleamed with the ruthless clarity of a man who had crushed rebellions with a gesture. Yet, beneath that cold exterior, a sense of vulnerability lingered, a weight born of too many years. At the top, too many knives at his back. The throne was his, but it was no longer an unassailable fortress. The winds of change were stirring, and he could feel them. Cladon, Duke of the West, sat just left of center. Not at the top, not yet, but close enough that all roads passed through him. His face was carved from marbly calm, cold, unreadable. His eyes, though, were sharp. A predator observing its prey. Kael didn't chase the throne. He made the throne turn toward him, like a kingmaker pulling the strings from behind the curtain. Today, however, the game had shifted. The tension in the air was thick, laden with an unspoken uncertainty that even the Emperor couldn't dismiss. But today, something in the chamber felt different. The Emperor's proclamation. Aldrich's voice shattered the silence. It rang out irregular and cutting, shearing through the murmurs of uncertainty like a blade through flesh. "Let us begin," he commanded. "We face 3 storms, and only fools wait for storms to pass." He pointed to the map spread across the table, his finger tracing the red markers that seared the parchment. "First," he said, his voice thick with authority, "the Western Rebellion. Cities seized by rogue warlords, armed with gold and steel. Someone is feeding the fire. Someone with influence, someone with power." The room fell into a hushed murmur, eyes flicking toward the map, toward the bold red streaks cutting through the once peaceful Western territories. "Second," Aldrich continued, his finger now hovering over the northernmost territories. "The northern incursion. Unnatural creatures breaching the frost line. Not mere raiders, these are something older, hungrier. This is not a battle of men, but of something far worse." A collective shiver ran through the council. A few glanced nervously toward the priests, but the men and women of the Empire knew too well that not even their divine powers could predict the true nature of the forces moving in the north. Finally, the Emperor said, his voice lowering slightly, "The royal crisis. Betrayal from within our very court." Quiet whispers that have now bled from the throne itself. The priests, who had been whispering prayers beneath their breath, now stiffened. Even the mages exchanged uneasy glances. But it was the noblest of those who stood closest to the Emperor that shifted the most. Guilt, anxiety. Kael watched each of them, noting the subtle changes in their posture, the nervous twitches of their hands, the way they shifted their gazes when Aldrich's focus moved to another. Kael's precision strike. "I say we strike now!" barked Duke Dargrave, slamming his fist down on the table with such force that the sound echoed like thunder in the chamber. His eyes blazed with the ferocity of a man eager for blood. "Crush the rebellion before it spreads to other regions. Let the rebels know that the Empire is not a thing to be trifled with." "Idiocy!" General Corwin snapped, his voice cutting through the air. "Dividing our forces to combat the rebellion is madness. We risk slaughter on 2 fronts. If we spread ourselves too thin, we'll be overrun from the north, and our borders will collapse under the weight of the beasts from the Frostlands." As voices clashed like steel, Kael sat in silence. His eyes flicked between the leaders, letting the chaos unfold around him. He let the tensions swell, let the arguments burn themselves out. The foolishness of the others gave him time to observe, time to measure. Then, as if cutting through fog, Kael stood. His movements were deliberate, controlled, but there was something predatory in his stance, here like a wolf poised to strike. The room stilled, the noise dying down as all eyes turned toward him. "Your Majesty," Kael said, his voice smooth, every syllable calculated to perfection, "this is not a war of swords. It is a war of masks." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. What did Kael mean? The priests exchanged puzzled looks, the generals muttered among themselves, and even the Emperor's sharp eyes narrowed as he regarded Kael. "We must not fight blindly," Kael continued, his voice steady but cutting through the uncertainty like a knife. "We must first remove the masks. Learn who funds the rebels, who hides in the shadows and directs the fires of insurrection. We must uncover the truth behind the creatures in the north, and we must identify the puppet masters pulling the strings from within our own walls." Kael's gaze swept the room, a slow, unhurried. His eyes locked with each individual at the table, and for a brief moment, they all felt the weight of his scrutiny. Then, his gaze settled on one particular figure, a noble, pale and quiet, who shifted uncomfortably beneath Kael's watchful eyes. "And most importantly," Kael said, his voice lowering just enough for everyone to hear, but not enough to be casual, "a broken bar. We must unmask the traitors here. In this room, before they betray us again." A deathly silence fell over the chamber. No one spoke. No one breathed. The unveiling. The Emperor's voice sliced through the silence like a blade of cold steel. "Do you have proof?" he demanded, his golden eyes flashing with a cold light. Kael's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of arrogance. It was inevitable, as if he already knew the game was his to win. "I will," he said simply, stepping back from the table and raising his hand in a single, fluid motion. In an instant, the chamber doors flew open. Guards stormed in, dragging a cloaked man between them. A bloodied, trembling. The noble, once familiar to many in the room, was barely recognizable under the weight of his disgrace. He had been caught fleeing the capital, a scurrying rat exposed for all to see. The captain of the guard knelt before the emperor. "Caught fleeing the capital, Your Majesty," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. Letters on his persona sealed correspondence addressed to rebel warlords. Gasps echoed around the room. Shock and disbelief rippled through the assembled leaders. They all recognized him, an influential noble with ties to several powerful houses. His betrayal had cut deeper than anyone could have anticipated. Kael did not look surprised. His expression remained calm, calculating. His lips twitched upward ever so slightly, as if he had expected this moment. The bait had worked. The trap had sprung, and the traitor had never even realized he was on stage. The domino falls. The Emperor's voice was a cold, cutting whisper. "Name your conspirators," he ordered, his eyes fixed on the noble with lethal intensity. The noble trembled, his hands shaking violently as he glanced around the room. The weight of his guilt was too much to bear. Tears mixed with blood as he spat out a name, one that no one had dared to suspect. A duke, a trusted general, an ally of the emperor's. A duke at the table flinched. A general froze mid-breath. One of the empire's most trusted figures had just become its greatest disgrace. The room erupted in chaos. The nobles scrambled to distance themselves. The generals barked orders, and the priests began chanting under their breath, their faces pale with fear. But amid it all, Kael remained silent. He said nothing. He did nothing. He only watched, measured, calculated. Loyalties shifted like sand in the wind. The entire council was in disarray, with accusations flying, guards rushing to arrest the traitors, and the court mages beginning their ritual to search for dark magic within the noble's mind. And in the center of it all, Kael stood unmoving, a silent architect of the storm. The storm had begun. He hadn't just uncovered a traitor, he had moved the board, and soon, the empire would belong to him. The Grand Council chamber trembled beneath the weight of accusation and betrayal. A singular figure, Duke Varian, stood bound before the gathered assembly, his hands tied in iron that glinted in the flickering torchlight. His eyes burned with defiance, the blood trickling down his face from an earlier interrogation only serving to accentuate the fire within him. Guards, tense and watchful, kept their swords pointed at his back, their grip firm yet hesitant because there was something far more dangerous in the air than steel. The storm had begun, and Claudant sat at the table, untouched by it, a still point in the chaos. His fingers were lightly clasped before him, and his eyes swept the room, noting every subtle shift in posture, every twitch of the lips, every thought unspoken. The nobility squirmed in their seats, the generals locked in silent war of glances, their eyes darting between each other and the exposed traitor. The priestesses muttered soft prayers under their breath, the court mages casting subtle glances at one another, as if already weaving their own spells. But Kael, he was the calm at the center of the storm, the only one in the room who had not yet flinched. He had cast the first stone, and now, the ripples spread, carried by the currents of ambition and fear. The Emperor's judgment. Emperor Aldrich Vanthos, a towering figure cloaked in crimson, rose from his seat with an unnatural grace, his movements deliberate, calculated. The robes of his imperial office shimmered as they trailed behind him like a veil of blood-stained shadow, but it was the gleam in his eyes that captivated the assembly. Enough, the Emperor's voice boomed, low and steady, his words carrying a weight far beyond their simple meaning. The air seemed to pulse with the gravity of his command. Instantly, the room fell silent. The echoes of whispered accusations and simmering rage stilled in the face of his authority. His gaze settled upon the bloody Duke Varian, kneeling before the council, his posture still defiant despite the grim reality of his situation. "The evidence is undeniable," the Emperor intoned, his voice thick with the finality of a death sentence. His golden eyes never wavered from Varian's trembling form. "I offer you one chance," Aldrich continued coldly, his words measured, as if he were offering a final favor to a man already damned. "Speak. Not for mercy you'll find none here, but for legacy." Varian's lips twisted into a smile, a cruel, twisted thing, more a sneer than anything else. His voice came in a rasp, each word sounding like it had been dragged through jagged stone. "You think killing me will end this?" His eyes flicked with a knowing glint, dark circles beneath them showing how long he had been prepared for this moment. "The pieces are already moving. The rebellion is not a spark, it's a fire. And it's spreading." A ripple of unease moved through the nobility. The generals exchanged brief, telling glances. The priestesses fell silent, as if the weight of Varian's words was something they could not ignore. For a brief moment, fear stirred in the hearts of the powerful, because Varian's words were not just the ramblings of a desperate traitor. They were the echoes of something deeper, something far more insidious. Kael didn't blink. His eyes never left Varian's face, studying him with the detachment of a scholar examining a rare specimen. To Kael, Varian was no longer a man. He was a discarded piece, used, exposed, and now irrelevant. The rebellion had begun. Yes, but Kael had set it in motion the moment he had chosen to play the game. Varian's words, however, carried a different meaning. This was no desperate plea for mercy. This was a message, a warning to those who would dare challenge the rising storm. The Emperor's sharp gaze hardened as he listened, and his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Let this fire serve as a warning," Aldrich declared coldly. He gestured toward the guards. With a single movement, the room seemed to hold its breath. And then Varian was dragged away. His screams echoed down the long corridor as the grand doors slammed shut behind him, sealing the traitor's fate. The nobles remained silent as the last echoes of Varian's cries faded into the night. The court had witnessed a public executioner, an act designed to strike terror into the hearts of any who might dare think of rebellion. The Emperor had acted swiftly, but Kael knew better. The surface had been scratched. The real danger still lay hidden, deep within the shadows, and Kael was already moving in them. Nightfall in the imperial capital. The imperial capital settled into a heavy, uneasy silence as nightfall descended. The city was alive with whispers, rumors spreading faster than the fires that consumed the distant northern mountains. The streets, once teeming with the usual bustle of nobility and commoners, now carried an undercurrent of fear. And at the heart of it all, Kael sat in his studio alone, save for the parchment that littered his desk. His fingers skimmed over the letters, the weight of intelligence reports and war-front movements pressing on him. His eyes scanned through the sealed messages with practiced war-front intelligence, noble alliances, the growing whispers of something dark stirring in the northern territories. The rebellion was only a symptom. The real threat was something deeper, more ancient. There was a knock on the door, precise, deliberate, and unmistakable. "Enter." Kael's voice was calm, unperturbed. He did not need to turn to know who it was. The door opened softly, and a shadow slipped in, Sadia, graceful, silent, lethal. Selene. Her presence filled the room like a delicate storm. Silver hair cascaded over her shoulders like moonlight spilling across an ebony sea. Her violet eyes, gleaming with secrets and unspoken promises, never left Kael's face. "You played your part well." Selene's voice was low, almost teasing, but there was something far more dangerous lurking beneath her words. Kael did not look up from his papers. "You're not here for compliments." She smiled, the curve of her lips sending a subtle thrill through the room. "I'm here because the game just changed." Kael set down the letter he had been reading, his attention now fully on her. "Speak." Selene moved closer, the faintest trace of a smirk curling on her lips. "Varian wasn't leading the rebellion. He was a mouthpiece. The true architect hasn't revealed themselves yet." Kael's gaze sharpened. "Then why risk exposing a piece so early?" "To draw you out," she replied, her voice dripping with the thrill of the game. "Or to test you." Kael's fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the desk. He was not one for surprises, and yet he could not deny the thrill that ran through his veins. "What else?" Selene stepped closer, her eyes glittering with hidden knowledge. "There's an underground gathering 3 nights from now. Not just rebels, nobles, generals, warlords. A meeting of enemies, a broken bar, and those who think they can win without you." Kael stood slowly, his movements deliberate, each step carrying the weight of his resolve. Then let them try. Celine's smirk deepened. You'll need to go in alone. No titles, no guards. Kael turned to look out the window, where the moon hung high over the imperial capital, casting its silvery light across the quiet streets. I've never needed guards. The day after. The days that followed were marked by tension and blood. Duke Varian's execution became the talk of the city, his gruesome end serving as a stark reminder of the Emperor's unyielding authority. The streets buzzed with whispers of the rebellion, of enemies within the court, and of dark forces at play. The Emperor, in an attempt to solidify his grip, tightened the leash on the court. Arrests were made. Inquisitions ensued. Quiet assassinations claimed their victims. The pulse of the capital quickened, but it was clear to Ala no one, not even the Emperor, truly understood the full scope of the war that had just begun. And Kael, he had already moved beyond. He was not interested in chasing shadows. He had already begun to command them. His eyes were set on the deeper game, the one where men and women were but pieces on a board he controlled. The Empire teetered on the brink of something far greater than civil war. It was on the edge of a transformation, and Kael, he was already playing a different game. The grand banquet hall shimmered with an air of sophistication, a lavish display of wealth and power. Golden chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, their warm glow casting intricate shadows on the marble floor. Velvet draped tables, adorned with silver candelabras and crystalline goblets, gleamed like treasures under the lights. The soft hum of music floated from the orchestra pit in the far corner, its notes crisp and graceful, an illusion of peace amidst the storm that loomed just beneath the surface. Laughter rippled through the gathering, a polished, insincere, and accompanied by the clinking of glasses. But it was the type of laughter that had no true joy behind it, the kind that masked ulterior motives, hidden resentments, and fears that only grew sharper with every passing moment. Every noble present knew that this evening was not about the joy of celebration. It was a game of survival, and every move made had the potential to either lift them higher or see them cast into the pit of irrelevance. At the heart of it all, a single figure sat untouched by the currents swirling around Hemacladon. The young duke, already a legend whispered about in the darkest corners of the Empire, and yet the one most feared in plain sight. His attire was simple yet striking. He wore black, trimmed in crimson, as though a blade had been sheathed beneath his clothing. Elegant, understated, and yet deadly in its potential. His goblet set before him, untouched, its contents shimmering in the candlelight. His presence radiated power, yet there was no visible effort in it. He was an immovable center in the storm, and every gaze in the room was trained upon him. The murmur of voices hushed as he lifted his head slightly, his eyes sweeping across the sea of nobles, each of whom now bore some combination of respect, fear, or contempt. They had once whispered behind his back, dismissing him as a mere upstart with lofty ambitions. Now, those same whispers came from their lips, filled with curiosity and anxiety. They could sense that Hemacladon was more than just a rising star. He was a force, a man capable of bending empires to his will. And they all knew that tonight, they were dancing on the edge of his plans. The rebellion still lingered like a sickly beast, to its breath shallow, its pulse weak. The Empire had suffered its first tremors, but Kael's grip was tightening with each passing day. The tremors that started with a mere rumor had now escalated into a quake that threatened to tear the very fabric of the imperial court apart. This night had been orchestrated with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony, each movement calculated, each note placed with careful intention. It was a game Kael had set in motion, and tonight would be the culmination of the first stage of his plan. Act 1. Exposure. Rumors fed like poison into the ears of trusted allies and enemies alike. Carefully selected letters accidentally intercepted. A mix of truth and lies designed to breed suspicion and fear. The rumors spread like wildfire, each whisper adding fuel to the fire of distrust. Act 2. Division. Old rivalries were reignited. Trusted confidants began questioning each other's loyalties. Long-standing alliances frayed at the edges, threads of loyalty unraveling in the face of uncertainty. Paranoia crept into the hearts of even the most steadfast, and Kael ensured that the suspicion pointed inward, sowing discord among those who had once been united under a common cause. Act 3. The Kill. The final act, where betrayal would be the weapon, not steel. Across the banquet table, Duke Reinhardt sat, a man forged in the fires of war, his iron will and military genius unmatched. His weathered face bore the marks of many battles, and his grey eyes were sharp, calculating. His dark hair, braided with streaks of silver, was a testament to his age and experience. Reinhardt was a relic of the old order, a warlord who had seen the rise and fall of many empires, and now, his allegiance hung precariously in the balance. He raised his glass slowly, his eyes locking with Kael's as he did so. The challenge in his gaze was unmistakable. "Duke," he began, his voice carrying across the room, clear and deliberate. "Your rise has been a broken bar, meteoric. One might wonder, in whose name do you truly rise?" The question was blunt, a provocation meant to test Kael's loyalty and intentions. It was a challenge, and Kael's reply would determine the course of the evening. The room fell silent, every ear straining to catch Kael's response. The air thickened with tension as the guests waited for the young duke's reply. Kael's eyes remained calm, cool, and deadlier than a drawn sword. He met Reinhardt's gaze with a quiet intensity, the kind that could strip a man of his pride without ever needing to raise a hand. "Loyalty," Kael said softly, his voice carrying through the room like the edge of a blade. "Loyalty is the currency of fools when spent on weak kings and grumbling causes." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The words landed like a weighty stone in the center of the gathering, the silence following them a suffocating thing. Kael's words had not only rebuffed Reinhardt's challenge, but they had also sent a subtle yet powerful message to everyone present. Loyalty, in this world, was a fragile thing, a commodity to be spent wisely. And Kael, ever the strategist, was not one to waste it. Reinhardt's smile didn't reach his eyes, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his glass tighter. His military mind, so accustomed to commanding respect through force and blood, now found itself stifled by the sharp edge of Kael's intellect. "Then you serve only yourself?" Reinhardt asked, his voice a low growl, barely hiding the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Kael tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharpening. He leaned forward, his hand steepled in front of him as though contemplating a delicate puzzle. "I serve power," he said, his voice deliberate, each word resonating like a hammer strike. "And I do not pledge it to those too blind to wield it." The words hung in the air, slicing through the tension in the room. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Reinhardt's challenge had been met, and Kael's reply had not only disarmed it but had done so in a way that left the veteran warlord powerless. His hands trembled ever so slightly, the first crack in his ironclad demeanor. Kael's gaze swept the table again, pausing briefly on the nobles who sat watching, waiting. The mask of civility had begun to crack, and behind it, the true nature of the empire was slowly being revealed. But Kael was not finished. He turned his attention to Viscount Dorian, a man with a nervous tic that betrayed the deep anxiety he carried. Dorian was a lesser noble, a man with much to gain and even more to lose. His reputation as a confidant to several high-ranking officials had made him a valuable asset to Kael's mind, a potential liability. "Tell me, Viscount," Kael said, his voice smooth as silk but carrying a lethal undercurrent. "How fares your correspondence these days?" Dorian blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in attention. His heart rate quickened, but he forced a smile, trying to mask the unease creeping into his veins. "I beg your pardon?" Kael gestured slightly, and a silent servant stepped forward, placing a sealed black letter on the table. The wax seal was marked with a serpent's fang, an unmistakable symbol of one of the rebellion's covert factions. The room seemed to inhale in unison, every eye now fixed on the letter as Kael's finger brushed across it, tracing the outline of the seal. "This," Kael said, his voice cool and unyielding, "was intercepted from a courier heading west. It names routes, numbers, secrets only shared within this room." A tense silence followed as the letter was placed before Dorian. The color drained from his face as his mind raced, struggling to grasp the implications of Kael's words. Reinhardt stood, fury flashing in his eyes. "Is this your doing, Dorian?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I would never!" Dorian's protest was weak, a desperate plea, but it rang hollow against the overwhelming weight of the evidence. Kael didn't even glance at Dorian. His eyes remained on Reinhardt, allowing the silence to fester, to deepen. The room's atmosphere thickened, and the seed of suspicion began to grow, twisting and gnawing at the fragile bonds between the nobles. The silence stretched on, and in the midst of it, Kael's plan unfurled in full. Reinhardt's eyes turned toward Dorian, his expression one of barely contained rage. "You betrayed us. You sold us for coin on comfort. You're nothing but a rat in the walls." The nobles began to murmur among themselves, their gazes shifting uncomfortably as the accusations flew. What had begun as a simple challenge between Kael and Reinhardt had now spiraled into a full-blown spectacle of betrayal. The delicate web of alliances that had held the Empire's court together was unraveling before their eyes. Dorian continued to sputter his denials, but the damage was already done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they began to grow rapidly. Trust was a fragile thing, and now, it was shattered. Kael leaned back in his seat, his fingers steepled together, his gaze unwavering as he watched the chaos unfold. It was a beautiful sight, the grand illusion of unity crumbling under the weight of suspicion, paranoia, and betrayal. By the end of the night, blood would be spilled. But Kael, he would walk away unscathed, his influence growing stronger, his grip on power tightening with every passing moment. This was only the beginning. The grand hall of Duke Clardon's estate shimmered in a muted sea of golden light, each lantern casting shadows that danced like phantoms across the polished obsidian floors. The rhythmic patter of rain against tall windows echoed like the steady drumbeat of an approaching army. It was a night crafted for secrets, an evening where power would shift, alliances would fracture, and Kael would tighten his grip further on the strings of the Empire. At the head of the long table, Kael sat like an unmoving pillar of stone, his expression a perfect mask of unreadable calculation. His eyes, the color of midnight, flickered with a depth that betrayed none of the turmoil swirling within his mind. His hands were steepled, fingers pressed together with deliberate care, as if to physically contain the labyrinthine designs he wove behind them. The world was changing. Tonight, the Empire would feel the shift, and Kael would ensure it felt his touch. Before him stood three figures, each one playing a part in his grand design, each one either a weapon to be used, a lever to be pulled, or a liability to be disposed of. Lord Vaska, the avaricious noble whose influence and wealth came from the Empire's sprawling black markets. His eyes gleamed with a constant hunger for more gold, his every gesture revealing the sickness of his greed. But Kael had something he wanted, something powerful enough to command loyalty even from the most corrupted of men. General, once a proud commander in the heroes' ranks, now a disillusioned man whose bitterness had turned him into a dangerous ally. His past, filled with noble ideals, had been shredded by betrayal, and now he stood before Kael, a broken man desperate for a new cause to serve. Kael could use that desperation, could mold it into something lethal. Queen Elendra Valian, the epitome of imperial grace, a queen draped in silver and sapphire, her poise that of royalty. She sat across from Kael, her posture regal, her gaze piercing. Behind her beauty, there was calculation, a mind as sharp as the blade at her side. Elendra had known from the beginning that the balance of power was shifting. She knew Kael was more than just a rising noble. He was a force, and tonight, she would decide whether that force would be wielded against her or with her. Kael finally broke the silence, his voice smooth, measured, every word a blade wrapped in velvet. A queen, visiting my estate on a storm-drenched night. Should I be on a broken bar or cautious? Elendra's smile was faint but cutting. Her eyes narrowed, a glimmer of amusement dancing within them. A man who commands shadows should always be cautious, Duke Cardon. The words fell like a challenge, though the queen's tone was calculated, her sharpness unmistakable. The tension in the room thickened. Vaska shifted uncomfortably, his hands twitching, eager for something or anything that might break the silent standoff. General Will remained stoic, his unreadable gaze never leaving Kael. Kael set his goblet down, the soft click of the crystal against the obsidian table echoing louder than the thunder outside. Then let us be honest. This is no courtesy visit. Elendra's gaze sharpened, her posture ever so slightly leaning forward. The hero's faction grows erratic, paranoid. They believe someone has infiltrated their ranks or corrupted them from within. "And you believe it's me?" Kael's words were not a question but a challenge, an invitation to a dance of words. "I know it's you," Elendra replied, her voice steady, yet there was a crackling energy in the air between them. "The whispers speak your name louder than ever." Kael leaned back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. "Whispers are often born from fear. But perhaps fear is useful." Elendra's eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to peer through him, to see beyond the polished exterior into the depths of his plans. "What I fear is not you. What I fear is the chaos you're helping breed. The hero's righteousness is unraveling. If left unchecked, the entire empire could burn." She wasn't accusing him, at least, not directly. No, her words were carefully crafted to make him see her concern, to make him understand that she, too, was in danger. She wasn't here to challenge him, not yet. But she was positioning herself, ever the queen, for something more. Kael's lips curved into a faint smile. "Tell me, Your Majesty, a broken bar, is this an olive branch, or a veiled threat?" "I want balance," Elendra said, her voice lowering, becoming even more dangerous. "And your broken bar, you have a gift for bringing even gods to heel." Kael watched her closely. He had expected this. Elendra was not a fool. She knew the currents of power flowed through Kael's veins, and she knew that now, with her kingdom in turmoil, she needed someone who could control those currents, not just ride them. She continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "They say you took someone precious to the hero." Kael's expression remained unchanged. He had anticipated this moment of this question. The hero's former lover was a wound Kael had deliberately opened, a play that had been both strategic and personal. "Took" was too crude a word, too simple for the intricacies of the situation. Kael's voice, when he spoke, was velvet wrapped around steel. "Let us sigh a broken bar. She saw something in me the hero never offered. Clarity, power, purpose." Elendra's eyes darkened, her smile fading into something colder. "You're dismantling him," she murmured, almost to herself. "I'm showing him the truth," Kael replied, his voice dripping with quiet malice. "And when he breaks a broken bar, what remains will belong to me." The queen stood, her movements graceful and precise, like a dancer preparing for the final bow. She turned to leave, but paused, her back still to him. "Be careful. The hero is not the only one who has something to lose." Kael's eyes flicked toward her, his gaze unwavering. "But I am the only one who has planned for everything." And with that, Elendra disappeared into the storm, her footsteps swallowed by the howling wind. Kael turned his attention to who had remained silent throughout the exchange, watching the play unfold with the detached interest of a man who had seen far too much bloodshed to be moved easily. "The queen plays the long game," Kael said, his voice sharp. "But she will bend a broken bar eventually." Kael nodded, his jaw tight. "And the hero?" Kael's expression sharpened, his eyes hardening. "We shatter him piece by piece." "Not with armies, with doubt." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. The subtle cruelty of his plan was far more devastating than any battlefield. War could be won with soldiers. But power was built on the foundation of minds and hearts bent to one's will. Kael's voice dropped to a whisper, the finality in it unmistakable. "Prepare the Shadow Legions. I want them ready when the war begins." Kael bowed, his steps silent as he left the chamber. Kael remained in the stillness, the only sound the rhythmic drumming of rain against glass. He gazed out into the night, his mind already calculating the next move as preparing for the next step in his grand ascension. The game had changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about control. It was about making the empire kneel before him, and every piece was moving exactly as Kael had planned. The storm that lashed against the estate was unlike any Kael had seen in years. Dark clouds pressed against the heavens, blotting out the stars, as through the night itself was cloaking the world in its deepest secrets. Lightning split the sky with jagged threads of white, briefly illuminating the sprawling grounds of Duke Cladon's fortress-like estate. The thunder rumbled like the growl of a beast stirring in its den, as if nature itself were preparing for war. Inside the private chamber, where the shadows seemed to stretch long and dangerous across the floor, Kael sat with an intensity that could have set the room aflame. The firelight from the hearth flickered, casting shadows that twisted across the walls like specters, reflecting the unrest building not just outside, but within the empire itself. Before him, spread across the table, lay a collection of parchment intelligence reports from his network of spies and informants throughout the empire. Kael's fingers skimmed over the pages with practiced disinterest, his mind already formulating plans, threading together pieces of a puzzle that was growing more complex with each passing day. The hero had finally begun his crusade, an inevitable move, but one that would cost him dearly. The political atmosphere in the empire was on the brink of eruption, and Kael could feel the weight of it pressing down on him like the storm raging beyond the walls. The hero had mobilized 4 elite units, ostensibly on a purification mission, a term so ironic it made Kael smirk. The righteousness of the hero's cause was about to collide with the darkness Kael had carefully woven into the fabric of the empire. The game had begun, and Kael was the master of its intricacies. Yet, despite the world shifting around him, Kael remained unmoved, his expression a perfect mask of unreadable calm. His mind churned with plans within plans, contingencies upon contingencies. The hero would learn the hard way that righteousness and faith were brittle weapons, easily shattered when faced with the grinding chaos of true power. Kael's thoughts were interrupted by the soft, deliberate knock on the door. His gaze didn't lift from the reports, and his voice came out like the sharp edge of a blade. "Enter." The door opened with a near-silent creak, and in stepped Selene Okdara, Kael's master of espionage. The shadows seemed to welcome her as one of their own, as she moved with the predatory grace of a panther. Her crimson eyes gleamed in the half-light, and her movements were deliberate, calculated, like a predator sizing up her next kill. "My lord," she said, her voice a cool whisper that matched the icy atmosphere of the room. "The reports are confirmed. The hero has begun mobilizing." Kael's eyes lifted just enough to meet hers, the subtle gleam of calculation never leaving his expression. "How many?" 4 elite units from the Holy Order, each unit led by a commander of significant rank. "Publicly, it's being called a purification mission," Selene said, her lips curling ever so slightly. "But we both know their true purpose." Kael's lips twitched at the corners in a smile that could have been mistaken for amusement. "The righteous dog believes he can purge darkness. He's about to discover that darkness is not a force that can be simply eradicated." Selene's eyes shone with a predatory light, and her voice dropped an octave. "Do you wish to intercept them before they reach our borders?" Kael's response was immediate, decisive, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Let them come. Let them believe they march in the name of justice. Let them arrive on our doorstep thinking themselves untouchable." Selene's brow furrowed slightly as she considered his words, but she did not question him. "You intend to welcome them with open gates?" Kael smiled to a slow, serpentine curve of his lips that did not reach his eyes. It was a smile born from knowing something others did not. A smile that carried the weight of destiny. "Not gates," he said softly, "but mirrors." Selene's head tilted slightly, her expression now one of intrigued calculation. "Mirrors?" "I don't follow." Kael stood from his seat, his tall, lean frame cutting a sharp silhouette against the firelight. As he crossed the room, he moved with an elegance that seemed almost inhuman, his every step filled with purpose. His gaze turned toward the high window that overlooked the rain-drenched lands, his reflection mingling with the storm's fury outside. "They come," he said, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic, expecting to face the darkness they have created. What they will find instead is a reflection of themes Elvis warped, fractured, filled with doubts. Paranoia, betrayal. The very things they see in us will be reflected back at them, until they no longer know who their true enemies are. Selene's lips parted slightly, a knowing gleam in her eyes. "You intend to turn them against one another?" "Precisely," Kael replied, turning his sharp gaze back to her. "The hero believes strength lies in righteousness. He believes purity is his weapon. I will show him that chaos, doubt, and fear are far sharper." Before Selene could respond, the door to the chamber creaked open once more. This time, the figure that stepped inside was larger, more imposing. General, Kael's most loyal and brutal general, entered with the heaviness of thunderclouds. His presence seemed to fill the room as he approached, his gait steady and strong. "My lord," Kael greeted, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The mercenary factions await your command. They have answered your summons." "And their loyalty?" clasked, his voice quiet but laced with authority. Will smirked, the thin curve of his lips a reflection of his own dark amusement. "To the one who pays them, as always." But the hero's crusade is costing them more than they anticipated. The coin is not enough to cover the blood spilled, and many are beginning to question if this is a cause worth dying for. Kael's eyes shifted toward the high window again, watching as the rain fell in thick sheets. The storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil stirring within the empire. "Then we'll give them something far more powerful than coin," he murmured. "Certainty, not ideals, not righteousness. Certainty." He turned back to face Kael and Selene, his gaze cold and unyielding. "The hero is blind to nuance. He believes in the purity of his cause. He will soon learn that purity can be poisoned. I will show him that the cost of righteousness is steep, and once the floodgates open, there is no going back." Kael took a step forward, his expression eager, a predator anticipating its prey. "What are your orders, my lord?" Kael's fingers traced the edges of a large war map spread out before him on the table. Lines of red, black, and gold were drawn across the empire, each one signifying a potential battleground, a potential weakness, a point of conflict to be manipulated. "We won't fight them directly," Kael said, his voice steady, his plan already unfolding in his mind. "We will break them from within." Selene's sharp eyes gleamed as understanding blossomed. "Turn the holy order against itself." Kael nodded, his lips curling into a smile that was both cold and triumphant. "Exactly. They come expecting darkness, but I will feed them doubt." Whispers of betrayal. Factions within their ranks questioning loyalty. A stolen ration shipment here, a forged message there. Just enough to begin unraveling the threads. And before they know it, they will be so consumed with suspicion and distrust that they will destroy themselves. Will leaned in, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "And when they arrive at our gates," Kael's eyes glinted with malice, "they will see their own reflection in the chaos, and they will flinch. They will hesitate. And in that hesitation, we will strike." For a long moment, the three stood in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the storm raging outside. The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of the coming war pressing down on all of them. The empire was on the verge of a storm, but it would not be the one they expected. Kael's voice was low, filled with a deadly certainty. "Let the hero march. Let him believe he is the one in control. By the time he reaches us, I will have already won." The grand halls of the royal palace shimmered beneath the glitter of golden chandeliers, every beam of light reflecting off polished marble, gilded pillars, and the polished silver of ceremonial guards. The air itself felt perfumed with tension. Whispers drifted like smoke among the nobles, thick with unspoken judgments and careful observations. At the center of it all stood Lucien. He had once commanded the room with his presence. The Golden Knight, the chosen hero. Now, his famed armor bore the scars of war, dirt-caked pauldrons, dented greaves, and faded insignia. There was no glory in his posture, only exhaustion, confusion, and a flicker of desperation behind tired blue eyes. Opposite him stood Cladon. No armor adorned Kael. He needed none. Clad in a deep crimson robe embroidered with silver arcane sigils, his figure radiated calm authority. He was a shadow woven into the lighter, silent, still, and far more dangerous than any warrior. The subtle curve of his lips hinted at amusement, or perhaps pity, but his gaze remained cool, measured. This was no clash of blades. This was politics. Poison. A war of perception, and Kael had already drawn first blood. King Alistair, old yet regal, sat upon the obsidian throne adorned with lion motifs. His once proud features were lined by age and sleeplessness, but his eyes still sought the truth. And yet, today, uncertainty clouded his judgment. "Lucien," the king spoke, his voice slow, ponderous. "You have long been the kingdom's sword, but today you stand accused, not praised. Explain yourself." Lucien took a step forward. His fists trembled not with rage, but disbelief. "Your Majesty, I've fought for this kingdom with every breath. These accusations are their lies, crafted to turn you against me." Kael's eyes flicked upward, meeting the king's. "I bring only facts, Your Majesty." "Let the evidence speak." A rustle of parchment. A nobleman stepped forward, dressed in the midnight blue of House Roan. He had once praised Lucien in courtly songs. Now, he bowed low. During the campaign in West Haven, the noble said, voice steady, the hero led a charge against the advice of his generals. His recklessness cost the lives of over 200 men, including innocents caught in the path of fire. Lucien's head snapped toward him. That's no to exclamation mark. There were demons. They would have slaughtered us all. Another voice joined the fray. A former commander, her arm in a sling. He acted on emotion. He gave no orders, only screams. I saw the madness in his eyes. More voices followed, each cutting deeper than steel. The murmurs of the court grew. Nobles who once toasted Lucien's name now glanced at him with suspicion or worse, contempt. Kael remained silent. He didn't need to speak. Every whisper was his dagger, every disavowal a step further into the hero's downfall. Then the final betrayal walked into the room. Her name was Elendra. Once, she had been Lucien's anchor. His light. She moved like dusk incarnate, graceful, uncertain, caught between memory and doubt. Lucien's eyes locked on her as if she were the last star in a collapsing sky. Elendra, he breathed. Tell them. You know me. You know who I am. Her voice was a whisper of wind. I did. I thought I did. His breath caught. Please, he broken bar. I've seen the aftermath, she said softly, not meeting his gaze. The towns burned. The children who screamed your name in fear, not faith. I don't know anymore, Lucien. I don't know what you've become. And like a candle in a storm, hope extinguished. The king leaned forward, closing his eyes. Until these matters are resolved, I am left with no choice. Lucien, you are hereby stripped of your title as the kingdom's champion. You are to surrender all command of the military and remain under supervision until further notice. The pronouncement echoed through the chamber like a death knell. Lucien stood still, cold, hollow. He didn't argue, didn't beg. He simply watched as everything, a title, faith, love, slipped through his fingers. As the court adjourned and nobles filed out, the chamber emptied save for two. Kael approached, footsteps slow, deliberate. Lucien did not look at him. Kael stood beside him, voice smooth, without triumph. Do you see now? Lucien's jaw clenched. You were the symbol, the ideal. But ideals are fragile, easily broken by reality, or are broken by a whisper. He leaned closer, his breath cold against Lucien's ear. You thought this was about right and wrong, about demons and valor. But this kingdom worships power, Lucien. And today, they chose their new god. Lucien finally turned his gaze, eyes burning with humiliation and hate. Kael smiled. And the best part? All I did was show them the truth. We're broken bar, you gave them the reason. Kael turned and walked away, his crimson robes trailing behind him like a sovereign's cloak. Behind him, Lucien stood alone beneath the weight of a fallen legacy. A hero in exile, a myth unraveling. And the storm was only beginning. The royal corridors stretched endlessly before Lucien, their opulence now suffocating. Every polished column, every flickering torch, seemed to whisper of betrayal, of a glory lost. Gold-embroidered tapestries once depicting his victories now appeared to mock him. He could almost hear the hushed laughter of the court, hiding behind velvet curtains and polished doors. The hero of the kingdom, a farce. The chosen of the gods, forgotten. The savior of the people, abandoned. And Kael had played him like a puppet, every move, every word, a carefully orchestrated tragedy. His boots echoed through the marble halls like the tolling of a funeral bell. Every step felt heavier, slower, as if the world itself recoiled from him, as if the very walls remembered. The moonlit garden awaited him beyond the final archway. A sanctuary of silver and silence, its stillness pierced only by the occasional rustle of wind brushing through the rose vines. Statues of fallen heroes lined the path, each carved in timeless triumph, stoic, eternal. Once, Lucien had walked here with pride, with her, with hope. Now, he couldn't meet their eyes. Then footsteps, soft, familiar. He turned, the pain twisting in his chest. She stood there, the woman he had loved, fought for, bled for. Her hair shimmered in the moonlight, and her eyes once filled with warmth now held something far colder. Something he feared more than blades or magic, doubt. Say it's a lie, Lucien whispered. Tell me you don't believe them. That you still believe in me. Silence. Her gaze faltered. Lucy on a broken bar. I did this for you, he said, stepping forward. For the kingdom. For us. But she took a step back. You let your anger lead you, she said softly. You changed. Lucian's heart pounded. I was betrayed. Kael twisted everything. Maybe, she interrupted, you were the one who never saw the truth. Her voice was quiet, but it struck like lightning. Lucian staggered, breath shallow. The weight of her words was heavier than any wound he had suffered on the battlefield. Her eyes, once the source of his strength, now looked through him like he was a stranger. Don't. He choked. Don't turn your back on me. But she already had. Her footsteps faded, each one echoing louder than the last, leaving him beneath the cold moonlight. The garden around him, once a place of peace, now felt like a graveyard, and the last piece of his world crumbled into silence. Lucian stood still, numb, the clapping, slow, inevitable, mocking. From the shadows of a marble arch, Kael emerged. He leaned against a pillar, the moonlight casting his figure in shades of silver and shadow. A devil draped in elegance. His eyes gleamed with mirthless amusement. Touching, Kael drawled, his voice low, silk-laced with venom. Truly, a performance worthy of tragedy. Lucian turned, fury igniting like wildfire. You, he spat. Kael offered a mild smile. You make it sound personal. Lucian's fists trembled. You did this. I merely lifted the veil, Kael replied coolly, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. The rest? You managed all on your own. Liar. Lucian lunged, but it was a desperate move. Reckless. Clumsy. Kael barely moved a sidestep, a flick of the wrist and Lucian stumbled past him like a drunkard. A shadow of the warrior he once was. Kael didn't even draw a blade. He didn't need to. Just a sigh, barely audible, so predictable. Lucian whirled, face twisted with rage and shame. Kael stepped forward, his tone sharpening. You stood on a pedestal, praised, worshipped. But the moment they saw your cracks, he gestured lazily toward the castle. They fled. The king doubts. The church whispers. Your allies scatter. He tilted his head. And she? Lucian's eyes burned, but no words came. Kael's voice dropped to a whisper, each word carved like a dagger. She left you. Lucian's knees buckled. His strength drained, not by magic, but by truth. I can still fix this, he gasped, reaching for something that no longer existed. Kael leaned in close, so close Lucian could see the cold calculation in his eyes. No, Lucian, he said, voice void of sympathy. You were never a hero. You were a symbol, a convenient myth, a story they needed to believe in. He paused, straightening. And now? Kael stepped back, his gaze final. You're nothing. Lucian's sword slipped from his grasp. The once sacred blade, gifted by the high priests and kissed by divine light, fell into the garden's earth with a dull thud. Its glow, once steady and radiant, flickered, then faded. He dropped to his knees, not broken in body but shattered in soul. Around him, the statues of old heroes looked down without mercy. Above him, the moon offered no comfort. And Kael turned his back. He didn't need to kill the hero. He had erased him. Lucian remained, surrounded by silence, by memory, by the echoes of a name that no longer held meaning. A cold wind stirred the garden, carrying away the last remnants of light. And in that moment, Lucian understood, the fall of a hero wasn't in battle. It was in being forgotten. The hero is dead. Only Lucian remains. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs like a wounded beast, shrieking through the narrow gorges as if mourning something long lost. Snow swirled in wild spirals, dancing atop the crags like restless spirits, never settling, never still. The sky above stretched endless and gray, a frozen ocean of clouds that bled no warmth, no mercy. Only silence here and the wind. Lucian staggered along the cliffside path, each step a cruel negotiation with gravity. His once pristine armor hung from him like the relic of a forgotten age, tarnished and dented, patches of rust blooming like rot across its surface. The crimson cape that had once trailed behind him like a royal banner now clung to his frame in tattered strips, soaked through with ice and blood, most of it his own. His breath came in ragged clouds. His skin chapped, raw, and palely cracked under the cold. His eyes, once burning with purpose, were dull now, rimmed with red from sleepless nights and haunted memories. Behind him, the capital lay far beyond the mountain pass, its towers lost behind a curtain of mist and betrayal. There was no path forward. And yet he walked, because walking was all that remained. He didn't know how long it had been since the banquet. Since that night, time no longer moved in ways he could understand. Days bled into nights and back again in a colorless cycle. Food had run out long ago. His water skin was empty. His last coin spent to bribe a ferryman who wouldn't look him in the eyes. He had become a broken bar, a thing, not a man. Not anymore. Not since the name echoed in his skull, not like a word but a curse. A wound that refused to scab over. A jagged piece of steel lodged between the ribs of his soul. He clenched his jaw until pain lanced up his temple. Kael hadn't bested him with a sword. That would have been mercy. No, Kael had whispered ruin into the ears of the court. Planted doubts like seeds, nurtured them with secrets, and watched as they grew into poisoned vines that strangled Lucien's legacy. Whispers in the halls, rumors in the church, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Until one day, the gates closed behind him. The knights turned their faces. The holy texts that had once sung his praises now declared him unworthy. A vessel no longer fit for divinity. Even Elendro had turned away. Not with hatred, with pity. That was worse, much worse. The sacred sword he carried, a blade once kissed by heaven's fire, was silent now. Its light extinguished. Its spirit a broken bar gone. Not even cold, just empty. Like him, he wanted to cast it aside, to abandon it like it had abandoned him. But he couldn't, because the weight of it was the only thing reminding him that he was real. He crested a hill and collapsed against a boulder, his lungs burning, blood crusted at the corner of his lips. His vision swam. The hunger gnawed at his belly like an animal, but it was the silence that hurt most. No voices, no prayers, no purpose, just the wind, screaming in his ears. Is this what becomes of legends? He wondered. Is this the fate of heroes who fall? He closed his eyes. Memories flickered, unbidden. The smile of a boy he saved in a burning village. The roar of a crowd as he lifted the sword high. The soft press of Elendro's lips on his cheek the night before battle. And Thena, in that damned banquet hall, standing still while Lucien screamed. Watching everything unravel with a calm smile, as if he had already won. He had. Lucien had walked into the trap with eyes wide open. The worst part? He had believed Kael trusted him, called him friend. A bitter laugh escaped Lucien's throat. It hurt. Everything hurt, and yet he still laughed, a short, broken, sharp as shattered glass. Because all of it was so pathetic. He was pathetic. He had fought for gods, for kings, for ideals written in books and sung by bards, and none of it had mattered. Not in the end. Not when the truth came dressed in Kael's voice, soft and cold, whispering, "You are only heroic so long as they believe you are." And now? No one believed. The sun began to set, what little light it offered staining the icy cliffs in blood-red hues. The shadows grew longer, darker. The cold sank deeper into his bones, turning flesh to stone. He took another step forward, and then another, and then his legs gave out. Lucien fell face first into the snow. The sacred sword slid from his back and struck the rocks beside him with a muted clink. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't care. The stars above wheeled silently in the darkening sky, distant, uncaring witnesses to his disgrace. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was where he died. Not in battle, not in glory, but alone, forgotten. The boots, footsteps, steady, purposeful, soft over the snow, but deliberate, a rhythm that didn't belong to the wind. Lucien blinked through the haze, trying to lift his head, couldn't. The world was spinning, his limbs unresponsive. A figure loomed in the growing dark. A woman, tall, slender, shrouded in crimson and shadow. Her presence wasn't loud, it radiated like a flame behind silk. Her cloak rippled without wind. Her skin, what little of it he could see beneath the veil, glowed faintly, like ember light beneath ash. Her eyes so impossible, red gold, burning, intelligent, wrong. She crouched beside him, her expression unreadable. Well, she purred, voice rich as velvet, smooth and wrong in the way honey might feel on a blade. "What's this I've found? A broken little myth crawling into my lands?" Lucien tried to speak, failed. His mouth moved, but no sound came. His body betrayed him again. She traced a gloved finger along the broken crest on his chest plate, as if tasting history through touch. "You smell of old power, she whispered. Celestial blood. Forgotten promises. Such a broken bar, brittle holiness. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. But beneath all that, rage, grief, shame. My broken bar delicious. Lucien managed a breath, a shallow, ragged. A spark flickered in his eyes. He hated her. He feared her. He wanted to speak. She tilted her head. Tell me, hero, she whispered, leaning closer. Do you seek redemption or revenge? Lucien opened his mouth. Blood touched his lips. No words came, only darkness. When he awoke, the cold was gone. He lay on rough stone, beneath a sky of swirling indigo and dead stars. A sky that didn't move, didn't blink. A sky that watched. Strange trees loomed in the distance, skeletal things that pulsed faintly within a light. The air was thick with magic, old and unfamiliar. He felt it crawl along his skin, probing, tasting. He sat up slowly. He wasn't in the kingdom anymore. He wasn't on the mortal plane at all. The realm before him was barren and vast. A jagged horizon of stone and ruin. Black rivers coursed through cracked valleys. There were no birds, no wind, only the distant hum of something sleeping beneath the soil. The sword was beside him, still cold, still dead. Footsteps approached. The woman stood again. This time, no veil. Her face was ageless, beautiful, alien, and her eyes a broken bar. Those terrible, wonderful eyes, a broken bar, promised both salvation and damnation. You have been cast out, she said, by men, by gods, by all who once claimed you. She extended a hand. But I do not cast aside what is broken. I reshape it. Lucien stared at her hand, then at the sword, then at himself. The path ahead was clear. It wasn't light that waited at the end. It was shadow. And he, too, had become shadow. He took her hand, and the crucible began. The great hall of the Imperial Palace, once a sanctum of valor and legacy, now lay desecrated. Once, the golden chandeliers above shimmered like stars to welcome foreign dignitaries and war heroes. Now, they hung dim, the once pristine crystals coated in a thin film of ash and blood. The crimson carpet that stretched from the towering doors to the imperial dais had been torn, soaked in battle and betrayal. Each step upon it whispered of the countless lives extinguished for the sake of power. The banners of the heroes' faction, once symbols of hope and resilience, hung in tatters, scorched at the edges like funeral cloth left too close to the pyre. The marble floor, cracked from sorcery and swordplay, reflected only flickering candlelight from shattered sconces. At the center of it all, like a corpse at a grand wake, lay the broken sigil of the old order. The crest of Lucien, the radiant knight, lay shattered and crushed beneath the heel of a black leather boot. And that boot belonged to Clawther. Draped in shadows, his midnight cloak flowed like liquid silk across the bloodied floor. Darkness clung to him like an old friend, and the air itself seemed to coil around him, pulled in by the sheer gravity of his presence. He did not merely stand there, he ruled the space. Before him, on his knees, was a man who had once stood taller than all others. Lucien, the Golden Knight, the chosen, the paragon of justice and hope. Now a hollow shell. His once radiant armor, engraved with prayers of light and polished by the hopes of millions, was cracked, chipped, and smeared with ash. The sword of his order lay discarded several feet away, broken clean in half. His hands trembled, no longer from battle fatigue, but from something deeper. Shame, regret, powerlessness. His face was gaunt, skin pale from sleepless nights and guilt-racked days. His once vivid blue eyes, which had once stared down monsters and rallied men, now seemed distant, a broken bar searching for a dream that no longer existed. Kael's smirk was slow, cruel. He circled Lucien like a predator savoring the helplessness of its prey. It's fascinating, really, he said, voice a velvet blade. How easily the righteous unravel when the scaffolding of delusion is pulled away. Lucien's voice was barely a rasp. My broken bar, you orchestrated everything. My allies, my reputation. Even a broken bar. He stopped. The name caught in his throat, as though saying it would make the pain too real. Kael raised a brow, tilting his head. Oh, her? The room shifted. From the shadows beyond the dais, a figure stepped forward. Elaine. Her silver blonde hair shimmered beneath the broken light, cascading down the back of a regal black gown embroidered with obsidian threads. Her steps were poised, deliberate, commanding. There was no hesitation in her stride, no remorse in her eyes. The woman who once stood beside Lucian, his brightest star, now stood beside Kael, the man who had extinguished that constellation. Elaine approached slowly, every inch of her transformed. Once the embodiment of compassion and light, now she was elegance forged in purpose, her soul redirected rather than extinguished. She bowed her head ever so slightly as Kael reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into his touch, not as a slave, not as a victim, but as an equal who had made her choice. Lucian's breath caught. A broken bar, Elaine, a broken bar. Why? Her gaze met his, unwavering. Her voice was gently still, the voice he remembered. But the softness carried steel. Because you clung to a dream, Lucian, she said. While he offered me reality. Lucian flinched as if struck. Yeah, broken bar, I tried to protect you. No, she said, eyes narrowing. You tried to mold me. You placed me on a pedestal and called it love. But when the world began to change, when you began to falter, you looked away. You did nothing. Kael chuckled. You mistook pride for purpose, he said, echoing Elaine's words. And now? Look at you. Barely a man, certainly not a hero. Lucian's fists clenched weakly. Rage boiled in his chest, but his limbs refused to obey. Every muscle screamed in protest. He tried to rise, desperate to prove he still had fight left in him. But his body collapsed again, forehead pressing against the cold marble floor. Kael knelt beside him, his shadow enveloping Lucian completely. His voice was a whisperer, but one that sliced deeper than any blade. Love is not about virtue, Lucian. It's about understanding, and I understood her in ways you never could. Lucian tried to spit something, words of defiance, maybe. But no sound came. Do you know what happens next? Kael asked, rising slowly to his full height. Silence, then a snap of his fingers. Two guards, clad in black ceremonial armor bearing Kael's crest, stepped forward. Their gauntlets gleamed, polished even amidst the bloodshed. They seized Lucian by his arms. He didn't resist. He couldn't. You will not die today, Kael said, addressing the stunned gathering of nobles, generals, and former allies. Execution is for threats. But you? He turned back to Lucian. You're a lesson. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even the most hardened among them looked uneasy. The hall filled with conquerors, betrayers, and survivors sensed something far colder than death. Kael's voice rose, measured, sharp as judgment. From this day forward, Lucian of the Radiant Order shall be stripped of all titles, all lands, all history. He shall be erased from our songs, our books, our memories. He let the words hang in the air. No monuments, no epics, no name. He stepped close again, crouching beside Lucian one last time. You will wander this world a broken bar, forgotten, powerless, watching me rise higher than you ever dreamed. Lucian's voice cracked. We're broken bar, can't a broken bar. Kael leaned in, voice low. And the best part? He whispered. You'll watch every kingdom you once protected a broken bar, every woman who once adored you a broken bar. His breath touched Lucian's ear. Kneel to me. Lucian gasped. A broken sound of despair. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, but no one offered him dignity enough to look away. Take him. The guards dragged him from the hall. His boots scraped against the stone as he was pulled like refuse. His cries hoarse and unrecognizably echoed through the chamber, then were swallowed by silence. No one spoke. Kael turned to face the room. Dozens of nobles, dozens of potential traitors, former skeptics, ambitious men and women whose loyalties had always hinged on survival. Their expressions shifted, some in awe, some in terror, all in submission. Kael raised a single hand. This day marks the end of heroes. His voice resonated like a cathedral bell, and the birth of a new age. A pause. The age of Kael. There were no cheers, only silence. A silence deeper than reverence. A silence carved from the realization that something irreversible had just occurred. That night, the skies above the imperial capital burned with the red hue of dusk and destruction. The city stretched out like a wounded beast beneath the heavens. Fires from the outer quarters painted the horizon. Bells tolled, though no one was sure whether it was for celebration or mourning. Kael stood alone in his private chamber. The walls were lined with ancient tomes, relics, and enchanted wards. Behind him sat the throne, still untouched. He did not need to sit to rule. Before him, a window overlooking the empire he had claimed. Then a movement. From the shadows, a figure peeled itself from the wall and knelt, cloaked in darkness. Master, a broken bar. Kael did not turn. Report. The voice was feminine, low, almost reverent. The celestial lords stir. The stars shift. Their eyes, a broken bar, are upon you. Kael's expression remained unreadable. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corners of his lips curled. As they should. He turned, just enough for the firelight to catch the edge of his smile. It wasn't joy, it was inevitability. Let them gather their armies, let them pray to their fading gods. He began walking toward the shadows, each step swallowing him in black. For when I rise, ye broken bar. He paused at the threshold, casting one last glance toward the throne. A broken bar, even the heavens will kneel. The night was vast to an endless abyss stretching over Voltha, where the cold winds carried whispers of unseen forces. From the highest balcony of his palace, Kael stood motionless, his silhouette carved against the tapestry of stars. Below him, the once fractured capital flickered with torchlight in revelry. The scent of wine and fire wafted from the streets, where commoners celebrated what they thought was the dawn of peace. Yet, despite the noise below, Kael heard only silence. Lucian was gone. His name stripped, his legacy shattered, his hope broken. A forgotten relic of a failed age. The noble houses that once dared oppose Kael had been methodically dismantled, their lands absorbed, their heirs exiled or executed. The throne was his, not claimed by birthright or divine prophecy, but earned through ruthless precision. Yet Kael did not smile. His golden eyes pierced the sky, watching the cosmos stir. Victory was a memento, and he had never been a man for moments. His gaze moved past the horizon, past the veil of stars, toward the powers that now whispered of him in celestial halls. The marble beneath his fingers was cold, smooth, untouched by the blood that had paved his ascent. Around him, the once pristine imperial gardens bloomed in wild defiance. He had let nature acclaim them a message. Perhaps that order born of fear would crumble, and true power thrived in chaos. Behind him, soft footsteps approached, delicate, measured, but no longer hesitant. Elaine stepped into the moonlight, her silver blonde hair now tied in a braid of thorns and silk. She wore black, and not mourning, but power. A queen in all but name, forged by betrayal and reborn in Kael's flame. "You've done it," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Lucian is erased. The old guard is gone. The kingdom bows." Kael did not move. "They bow, yes," he replied. "But not all kneel from loyalty. Some kneel from fear." "And fear fades." Elaine joined him at the railing. The night air tugged at her cloak, and she let it. "Then you remind them." "As you reminded Lucian." Kael glanced at her, a flicker of amusement touching his lips. "You sound almost nostalgic." She chuckled, but it was devoid of warmth. "Nostalgia is for those who lost something worth remembering." A pause. Then, quietly, she added, "He asked me why." Kael studied her face, but she kept her gaze on the stars. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," she whispered. "That I woke up. That the dream he offered was nothing but shackles painted gold." Kael nodded, approving. "Then you did more than betray him. You freed him." "Freed him to become what?" Her tone was sharp now. "A forgotten wretch, stripped of everything?" "Exactly." Another gust of wind swept through the balcony. The torches below flickered. Somewhere, a child laughed. Elsewhere, a man wept. Elaine turned her gaze upward. The stars seemed uneasy. "They're watching, aren't they?" Kael's expression sharpened. "Yes." "The celestial lords." Elaine was silent for a moment, digesting the weight of those words. Every child in the Empire knew the legends of the Celestials were not kings or gods. They were the architects, the arbiters of fate, the ones who moved stars as men moved pawns. "What do they want?" Kael's gaze darkened. "To remind me of my place." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "And what will you do?" Kael turned to her fully now. His presence was overwhelming, a tide of raw, simmering power. "Rewrite it." She shivered, but not from fear. "From more." "You need more than ambition," she said. "You need allies. Power that rivals theirs." Kael nodded. "I need influence beyond this realm." Elaine hesitated, her voice lowered. "There is someone you should meet." Kael raised a brow. "Speak." She stepped closer. "The Queen of Eldoria." The name struck like a chime in a silent cathedral. Eldoria, the ancient kingdom untouched by conquest, ruled by a queen of fabled beauty and unmatched cunning, a sovereign who had defied gods and kings alike, never conquered, never courted. "She has no equal," Elaine said. And no allegiance. But she watches, as we do. She may listen. Kael smiled, slow and dangerous. Then I will make her an offer. She is not easily impressed. Good, Kael murmured. I hate the easily swayed. Behind them, the shadows stirred. From the darkness near the stone archway, a figure emerged and knelt. Master. Kael didn't turn. Speak. The spy's voice was low, urgent. The stars are shifting. The celestial lords. They are no longer watching. They are preparing. Elaine tensed. Kael's eyes gleamed. Let them. He stepped away from the railing, cloak billowing like storm clouds behind him. The heavens prepare their judgment, he said. And I will meet it not with prayers, but conquest. As he vanished into the darkness, Elaine remained, staring at the stars. For the first time in years, they no longer seemed comforting. They seemed afraid. The throne room of Voltha stood cloaked in shadow and silence, a cathedral of dominion carved in obsidian and steel. Gilded chandeliers flickered above, each flame encased in enchanted glass, casting long, trembling shadows across the floor like the restless ghosts of the conquered. Power thickened the air, coiled and heavier, an unseen beast breathing just beneath the surface. Kael sat upon the high throne near his throne, carved from night glass and veined with blood iron, a relic of war reforged into a symbol of control. One leg draped casually over the other, fingers tapping in a slow, unreadable rhythm upon the armrest. It was a rhythm no one understood, except perhaps Kael himself. Even that was debatable. Elaine stood at his side, poised and lethal. Her fitted black silk hugged her frame like a second skin, the faint shimmer of warding glyphs sewn into the fabric only visible under certain angles of light. Her sword remained sheathed, but her eyes, those eyes were sharper than any steel forged in this world. The city of Voltha lay beneath them, tamed and bled into obedience. Its nobles whispered in chains, its rebels fed the ravens, and its banners bore the mark of the Shadow Court. The capital had been broken, reshaped in Kael's image, and yet a broken bar. It was the letter in his hand that commanded his full attention, a single piece of silver silk parchment. Its seal, a spiral of sapphire thorns entwined around a crescent moon, shimmered with quiet defiance. No human hand had touched it. The magic woven into the seal pulsed like a second heartbeat. Ancient, female, regal. The Queen of Eldoria had sent her invitation. Elaine shifted slightly, her voice the first to break the silence, smooth, but edged. She wouldn't have reached out unless she was curious. Her words were clinical, observant. But beneath the surface was concern, not fear. Elaine had long shed that, but wariness. That was harder to discard. Kael didn't lift his gaze from the letter. Curiosity, he murmured, is the first tether of control. Elaine's brow arched, though her lips curled into something darker than a smirk. You think you can leash her? I don't think, Kael said, standing, his shadow stretching across the floor like a blade. I know she'll see reason. Eventually, Elaine stepped forward. She's not like the others. You've broken kings, generals, gods pretending to be men. But she's not looking to bow. She's never bowed. Kael turned, his cloak of woven dusk trailing behind him like smoke. His expression a half amusement, half predator, carved lines of purpose across his face. Then I'll make her want to kneel. Kael's approach to Eldoria was as deliberate as it was quiet. No banners, no horns, no legions trailing behind like thunder, just shadows, silence, and the scent of inevitable change. He rode a single black destrier, flanked by only a handful of his personal guard, cloaked figures whose names were never spoken, whose blades had ended empires in silence. They left no trail behind, save for the soft hush of hooves and the occasional flicker of distortion where magic bent around them like a veil. Eldoria emerged on the horizon not as a city, but as a dream calcified into stone. Its towers shimmered in the violet dusk, carved from pale crystal and ancient marble veined with veins of glowing ivy. Bridges arched between sky-touched spires, suspended by spells older than kingdoms. Every structure sang with magic, not the wild, chaotic kind of the outer realms, but structured, deliberate, and proud. The air itself was different here, more alive. Watching, even Kael could feel it, like the land itself was judging him. He didn't flinch. The Queen's palace was no simple castle. It was a monument, a weapon sheathed in beauty. Sprawling gardens of bioluminescent flora bordered its alabaster walls, guarded by statues of faceless angels and veiled serpents. The gates were open wide, beckoning, yet offering no warmth, only challenge. Kael passed through them without slowing. Inside, the grand hall stretched like a cathedral of power. Moonlight filtered through enchanted glass, casting kaleidoscopic shadows on the polished floor. Nobles stood in small clusters, draped in velvet and silk, their faces hidden behind elegant masks. Tradition or fear kept their mouths silent, but Kael felt it. Their eyes, their tension, the recognition that something had entered their world, or something they couldn't name, but instinctively understood as dangerous. And then, the crowd parted. She descended the staircase with the slowness of a storm building on the horizon. Queen Isolde. She wore sapphire silk laced with onyx threads, her gown flowing like spilled ink over moonlight. Her hair, gold with the faintest silver undertones, cascaded in deliberate waves, not a strand out of place. Emerald eyes gleamed beneath a circlet of starlight and shadow, her gaze honed like a dagger. Her steps made no sound. Every inch of her was a message. I am untouchable. I am sovereign. Lord Kael, she said at last, her voice smooth as velvet and edged with steel. So the shadow of Voltha dares to darken my court. Kael didn't bow. He didn't need to. Instead, he offered a faint nod, just enough to acknowledge her status without submitting. I found your invitation difficult to ignore. A ripple of amusement touched the corners of her mouth, too precise to be mistaken for kindness. I didn't summon. I invited. A subtlety I suggest you learn before walking into a queen's court unarmed. Kael stepped forward, the hem of his cloak barely whispering across the marble. I never walk unarmed. A murmur rose through the gathered court, a half laughter, half tension. Isolde began to circle him slowly, each step a study in control. You come to Eldoria without fanfare, without demands. That either means you're cautious or arrogant. Kael allowed her to circle, every sense honed. Neither. Just focused. And what, I wonder, she purred, stopping behind him, is the focus of the Warlord of Shadows? He turned then, meeting her eyes head-on. Not your throne, he said. If that's your fear, I want something far more valuable. Isolde raised a single, perfect brow. And what would that be? Kael leaned in, his voice like silk laced with poison. Your allegiance. The word struck like lightning. The entire court stilled. A servant dropped a goblet. Somewhere in the rafters, a crocodancia, then silence. Isolde's expression didn't shift, but her eyes darkened ever so slightly. Danger, intrigue, perhaps delight. She turned and ascended her throne, her voice like distant thunder. Then let us talk, Lord Kael. But be warned, every king who's tried to chain me has drowned in his own ambition. Kael stepped forward, the court shrinking away from the force of his presence. Then I suppose, he said, smiling faintly, I'll just have to teach you how to swim. Later, they sat alone in the moonlight chamber, an ancient sanctum where treaties were once forged in blood and starlight. The walls shimmered with floating glyphs, each representing a piece of Eldoria's history. A table of obsidian divided them, but only in theory. Isolde sipped crystal wine from a glass etched with spell script. Her gaze never left Kael. You fascinate them, she said. The court, my nobles, even my spies, they speak of you like a force of nature, a shadow storm wrapped in flesh. Kael didn't touch the wine offered. He never drank what he didn't control. And what do you think I am? She considered him for a long moment. A liar, a manipulator, a predator in silk. But also, she leaned forward, a man who understands power the way most men understand hunger. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. And that frightens you? No, she said, her smile returning. It excites me. A pause. You want my allegiance, she continued. But Eldoria doesn't kneel to conquerors. We endure them, outlast them, sometimes seduce them. Kael's lips curled faintly. You believe you can seduce me into surrender? I believe, she said, rising, that submission isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. She walked to the window, her figure silhouetted by the moonlight. I have no intention of being your puppet, but if you're offering a partnership, something more nuanced, I'm listening. Kael stood, his voice low, assured. Good, because I don't need pawns. He stepped behind her, just close enough to let his presence touch hers. Not a threat, a promise. I need queens who know how to poison the wine and the bloodline. Isolde turned to face him. For the first time, Her mask cracked just a little. "You may yet be the most dangerous man I've ever met," she whispered. Kael smiled. "And you may yet become the most useful." The Queen's court was drenched in a velvet silence, thick as smoke. When predators circled each other, the faint scent of opium and incense hung in the air, a heady mix that seduced the senses and dulled the edges of awareness. Yet, in the center of the room, amidst a sea of gilded thrones and whispered courtesies, the tension crackled with a sharp, electric intensity. Every eye in the court was fixed on the two figures, and Isolde locked not in combat, but in the delicate, dangerous steps of a far more insidious dance. Isolde sat upon her obsidian throne, her figure a study of graceful control, exuding the aura of a ruler born into her power. Her emerald eyes glimmered with a mixture of intrigue and amusement, the faintest curve to her lips suggesting something far darker beneath her poised exterior. She leaned forward, her slender fingers trailing the rim of a crystal goblet. The deep, red wine shimmered in the dim light, its color dark as blood, a tempting shade that matched the aura of temptation that enveloped the hall. "You intrigue me, Lord Kael," she said, her voice smooth as velvet but with a hidden edge that made every syllable feel like a soft threat. "You rose from the ashes of a kingdom meant to die, and now you sit upon a throne built not only on fear and ambition but something far more elusive. Tell me." She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "What truly drives you?" Kael tilted his head ever so slightly, his lips curling into a faint, enigmatic smirk. It was not the smile of someone eager to please, rather, it was the expression of a man accustomed to power and the games it demanded. "Survival, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice low but carrying through the hall with effortless authority. "But survival is merely the beginning. The weak survive. The stronger." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "The strong shape the world." Isolde's eyes narrowed, and a sharp, calculating glint flickered in them. She studied him with renewed interest. "An honest answer," she mused, her voice a whisper of silk over steel. "Though often, such words mask ambition so vast it blinds the speaker." "Tell me, Kael, what is it that you truly seek?" Kael stepped forward, his every movement slow and deliberate, like a predator approaching prey. His presence seemed to fill the room, pushing back the air and forcing even the most powerful in the room to take notice. The nobles watched in breathless silence, the air taut with the promise of something more dangerous than simple court politics. "I have no need to hide my ambition," he said, his tone unwavering. "It is the fire that forged me, the spark that ignited my very being." "I came not to flatter you, Queen Isolde," he continued, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of truth, "but to build something neither of us has ever dared before." A ripple ran through the assembled nobility, their murmurs like the crackling of dry leaves in a storm. Some whispered of betrayal, others of the power struggles within the court, but all were silenced by the sheer force of Kael's words. His conviction was palpable, and it was clear that he was not speaking merely of personal ambition, he was speaking of something greater. Isolde's lips curled into a small, knowing smile, more weapon than warmth. "And what is it that you wish to build, Lord Kael?" Kael's gaze was unwavering, his voice steady and sure. "A future," he said, the word carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. The silence in the room deepened, and the tension in the air grew thick enough to choke. Every noble in the court seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Isolde's reaction. "A future?" she echoed, her voice lilting with an edge of skepticism, as though testing the strength of his words. "Built on what? Ashes, blood, or something far more insidious?" Kael allowed the silence to stretch, watching her with the patience of a seasoned hunter. He knew that this moment was as much a test of will as it was of words. He did not flinch, did not shy away from her challenge. Instead, he held her gaze, his eyes filled with the quiet confidence of one who knew his path was already set. "A world not ruled by the inertia of old bloodlines or the myths of gods," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "A future where power is not inherited but earned. Where those capable of reshaping the world are no longer shackled by the dying hands of tradition. Where what is built is not based on the whims of the past, but on the strength of the present." The court was silent, every eye fixed on him. Even the nobles who had once whispered of Kael as a mere opportunist now seemed to pause, sensing the gravity of his words. He was no longer a simple lord from a fallen kingdom. He was something far more, a something dangerous. Isolde's eyes narrowed with something like hunger. "And you think yourself the one to build this future?" she asked, her voice low, a challenging edge creeping into her tone. Kael met her gaze without hesitation, his certainty unshaken. "I am that future," he said simply. The words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at her feet. The room held its breath, and for a long moment, the only sound was the faint rustle of Isolde's gown as she shifted in her seat. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, not the sound of amusement, nor derision, but something far deeper. It was a laugh that carried with it an undertone of something far more dangerous, interest. "You are bold," she said, swirling the wine in a goblet, her fingers caressing the delicate glass as though contemplating something far more dangerous than the conversation. "And bold men," she added, her gaze locking with his, "are either crowned or crushed." Kael didn't blink. His posture was unshaken, his eyes never leaving hers. "And which would you prefer to witness?" he asked, his tone smooth but carrying a quiet promise. Isolde rose from her throne with slow, measured grace, each step purposeful and deliberate. The court parted instinctively as she descended the steps, the noble lords and ladies parting as though moved by unseen strings. The sound of her gown, a soft whisper against the stone, was the only sound that filled the space. She moved closer, circling him like a lioness stalking its prey. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, as though speaking directly into his soul. "That depends on whether you're worth more alive or undone." Kael's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of the game. He had come here with a single purpose, to stake his claim, to shift the tides of the empire, and to prove that he was far more than a mere upstart. She stopped behind him, and for a moment, there was nothing but the soft sound of their breathing and the faint hum of the world beyond the palace walls. The night stretched out before them like a dark canvas, painted with the possibility of power, of destruction, and of something far more dangerous. "Walk with me," she said, her voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. Without hesitation, Kael obeyed. He followed her through the palace, through the grand hallways adorned with ancient tapestries, and into the cool, open air of the high balcony. Eldoria sprawled below them like a living jewel, bathed in the eerie glow of violet lanterns that floated in the sky. The city seemed alive with whispered secrets and forgotten promises, the flickering lights casting long shadows that stretched into eternity. Isolde rested her hands on the marble balustrade, her gaze sweeping over the city below. As she spoke, her tone quieter now, but no less sharp. "Your presence has already shifted the tides of this kingdom, Lord Kael." Some nobles whisper of alignment. Others speak of knives. "Your shadow already touches every corner of my court, and soon it will touch every corner of Eldoria." Kael stepped beside her, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a question he already knew the answer to. "Do you speak of blades or alliances?" She did not look at him, not yet. Her eyes remained focused on the city below, the wind tousling her dark hair as she spoke. "I speak of threats, of promises, of what happens when two unstoppable forces meet and decide whether to destroy each other or remake the world." Kael's voice dropped, becoming intimate, like a whisper meant only for her ears. "And what do you want, Queen Isolde? To resist me, or to rise with me?" Isolde turned slowly, her face now illuminated by the moonlight, her eyes glowing with a molten emerald fire. Her lips curled, not into a smile, but into something far more dangerous, a promise, an invitation, a challenge. "You presume much," she said softly, her breath mingling with his. She stepped closer, the heat of her body a stark contrast to the cool air that surrounded them. He took her hand, not with force, but with the assurance of someone who knew exactly what he intended. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, the contact brief but meaningful. "I presume what I intend to claim," he whispered. For a long moment, they simply stood there, two sovereigns in perfect opposition, each a force of nature in their own right. The world tilted around them, the balance or power hanging on the knife edge between them. Finally, her lips curled into a slow, devastating smile, the kind that could shatter kingdoms. "You may be worth the cost of chaos, Lord Kael," she said, her voice low, her gaze never leaving his. Kael's smile mirrored hers, darker, colder. I was born in chaos. I don't fear the storm. I am the storm. She stepped closer still, her breath warm against his skin. Then let us see which of us commands the wind. The grand hall of the imperial palace glittered with a cold, almost eerie beauty. Suspended mana crystals cast their pale, ghostly light across the chamber, their ethereal glow staining the marble floor beneath them. These radiant orbs, ancient and pulsating with barely contained energy, flickered as though they were alive, responding to the tense atmosphere in the room. Above, golden chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like inverted crowns, their ornate edges glittering, almost mocking in their opulence. It was a space carved for royalty, where every detail, every facet of the architecture, whispered of power, of control. Yet, beneath the polished veneer, the hall held its breath, waiting. At the high table, Kael Nightshade sat like a shadow made flesh. His cloak of deep, shadow-black cloth seemed to absorb the light around him, making him a figure that existed only in the spaces between what was seen. His coat was etched with silver runes, pulsating faintly, like a heartbeat restrained. They seemed to shimmer with promise, a promise of things far darker than any noble present could truly understand. His silence was palpable, a living presence that dominated the room. It wasn't just his cold eyes or the sharp set of his jaw that commanded attention. It was the aura of inevitability that radiated from him, the quiet certainty that the very world bent to his will. Every noble in the hall felt it, even if they would not admit it. They were drawn to him, some out of fear, others from a sense of trepidation born of a knowing. No matter how hard they tried to look away, they couldn't tear their gaze from him. The fall of Lucian had sent tremors through the empire, ripples of shock that had yet to settle. The hero, the golden boy, the symbol of divine favor, had been brought low. The very figure that the masses had once prayed to had shattered before their eyes. In his place, a new symbol had risen, one not made of divine will or prophecy, but of raw, iron-willed force. Kael had not conquered the empire with armies or brute strength. No. His power lay in something far more insidious, his mind, his manipulation of the strings that held the empire together, and his ability to craft a future that none dared to imagine. As Kael sat in the throne room, watching the nobles mill about, the atmosphere in the room grew thicker, the tension rising like a silent storm. A herald, resplendent in his ceremonial attire, stepped forward with the formal announcement that would draw every eye to Kael. Announcing, Lord Kael Nightshade, Duke of Ebendorn. The herald's voice rang out, crisp and official, yet carrying a note of hesitancy. The room seemed to hold its breath, as the noble houses acknowledged the new force that had come to claim their attention. There was a ripple in the crowd, a subtle, but undeniable. Some nobles dipped their heads in a sign of reluctant respect, aware of the force Kael represented. Others, more bold or perhaps foolhardy, turned away, unwilling to meet the gaze of the man who had shattered the very foundation of the empire. The hero's fall was one thing, but Kael was something else entirely. Something more dangerous. Something that could not be predicted. And that, more than anything, made him the greatest threat the empire had seen in centuries. Kael rose from his seat, fluid and deliberate. The runes on his coat flared briefly, catching the dim light and casting his silhouette in stark contrast to the shimmering surroundings. He stepped forward, the room parting like a sea before him, all eyes locked on him. The faintest smirk touched his lips. He moved not with the haste of a conqueror, but with the assured grace of someone who knew that the world was his to shape, one careful word at a time. I stand before you. Kael's voice rang out, clear and calm, yet laced with an edge that carried weight. Not as a conqueror, but as a man who has seen the cracks in the foundation you've called sacred. The nobles, already on edge, shifted uncomfortably at his words. The room felt smaller, more claustrophobic. His gaze swept across them, his crimson eyes meeting those of the gathered lords and ladies. He held their gaze, unyielding, until the first few looked away, unable to withstand the force of his stare. For too long, Kael continued, his voice gathering strength. We've propped up fragile ideals. We've placed blind faith in a single figure, whether hero or ruler, it matters not. We have placed our trust in myth, in prophecy, and in the lie that power is bestowed upon the worthy by divine will. But when that figure falls, as Lucian has, what remains? He let the words hang in the air like a blade poised to strike. Silence settled over the court. Even the chandeliers above seemed to hold their breath, casting a dim glow over the tense room. "A broken system," Kael said finally, his voice low and final. "A leadership that prays for salvation rather than earning it. A kingdom of crumbling foundations, held up only by the frail hands of those who would rather rot than rebuild." The murmurs began, quiet and uncertain, like a storm gathering in the distance. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly, his next words carrying the weight of a man who had already seen the future. "Power should not be inherited. It should be taken. It should be forged in fire. Not whispered from throne as but declared to the heavens and earth alike. If you are too weak to claim it, then you do not deserve it." The silence in the room deepened. Every noble was now caught in the web Kael had woven with his words. Some stood rigid, their gazes locked to the floor. Others dared to meet his eyes, a flicker of defiance or of fear hidden behind their gaze. But none spoke. An elder noble, trembling slightly but composed, broke the silence. "And what do you offer, Lord Kael?" he asked, his voice edged with cautious curiosity. Kael turned his gaze upon the man, his expression unreadable. His lips curled into a slow, almost imperceptible smile, a smile that was as cold as it was assured. "A future," Kael said, each word a promise. "A future where the weak no longer strangle the strong, where power belongs to those who claim it, and not to those who think they are entitled to it by birthright." A younger noble, braver or perhaps more foolish than his peers, stepped forward. "And who leads such a future?" he asked, challenging Kael with an almost mocking tone. Kael's smile deepened, becoming something far darker. His crimson eyes glimmered like burning embers. "Who, indeed?" he replied, his voice soft and cold. Before any further conversation could develop, the doors of the hall swung open with a sudden gust of cold wind. The air seemed to freeze, and the floating lights flickered as through the room itself was caught in the grip of something ancient and powerful. The darkened threshold became the doorway to something far more dangerous. A figure stepped into the hall. No announcement, no fanfare. None was needed. She was a presence before she even entered the room. Her movements were fluid, effortless, as if the very air parted for her. Her gown was like smoky, dark and shifting, stitched with infernal sigils that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Her eyes, crimson and gleaming, held an ancient, ageless cruelty, and a hunger that only the truly predatory possessed. The nobles froze. Even those who had fought in wars, who had seen monsters and magic, felt the sheer power of her presence. It was as though the very space around her bent under the weight of her being. The Empress of the Underworld, the Queen of the Black Veil, Kael's mother. She moved without sound, crossing the marble floor like a shadow cast by some dark star. The room seemed to shrink around her, as if the mere act of her stepping into the court was enough to make the world feel smaller, more fragile. Kael's mother stopped before him, and for a long, agonizing moment, the court held its collective breath. She reached out with her long fingers, tipped with obsidian nails, and traced the collar of his coat. Her touch was cold, like death itself, and when her fingers brushed against his chest, the room seemed to hum with the echo of some unfathomable power. "My son," she murmured, her voice low and velvet smooth. "You've been busy." The court did not breathe. They watched as Kael, without flinching, met his mother's gaze, the same cold certainty in his eyes that had earned him his place in the world. "I do what is necessary," he replied, his tone as calm as the depths of a storm. A smile, pleased and dark, curved her lips. "Spoken like my blood," she whispered. Her eyes turned to the gathered nobility, and in that moment, the air grew heavier, charged with a crackling energy that made every noble in the room feel like prey beneath her gaze. The very atmosphere bent and twisted under her presence. "And yet," she mused, her voice turning sharp as glass, "you cling to your dust-covered traditions, hoping that the wind won't sweep you away." One noble, perhaps too proud or too foolish, attempted to speak. His voice was shaking, but he made his move. "This is a political court," he began, "not some mere." Her gaze shifted to him. He stopped speaking. His breath stilled, as through the very air had been taken from his lungs. His body locked in place, his skin drained of color. His mind screamed, but his mouth would not obey. The pressure on him was unbearable, yet it was as though she had not moved an inch. She had simply looked at him, and he had been reduced to nothing. Then, mercifully, The pressure released. The noble stumbled back, gasping, broken in spirit, his knees shaking as though he had just narrowly escaped death itself. She chuckled softly, the sound like the slithering of a serpent. "I adore politics," she said, the words dripping with malicious amusement. Kael's smirk returned, colder than before, as he looked at the nobles, his own dominance made even more undeniable by the presence of the woman who stood by his side. This was no longer a mere speech. It was a coronation, and Kael had already claimed his throne.